as you're not busy, could you send? Thank you, Matt, and everybody. All right, we're going to start the broadcast in a minute. Start the broadcast so our public attendees will be able to hear us also.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is the May 13th, 2020 special meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council. On our agenda today is a budget hearing. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, folks. Ms. Clerk, will you do a roll call, please?
Certainly. Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez. Here. Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon.
Here.
Councilmember Freedman. Councilmember Freedman. And we'll come back. Councilmember Harmon.
Here.
And Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
All right. When Councilmember Freedman comes back, he can pop on
and I'm here too.
And Mayor Maria.
Here. Thanks. So this is the time for public comment for items that are not on our agenda. So this is your opportunity to speak to us on, well, just about anything. We hope it has to do with city business, but we're pretty liberal about that. Ms. Clerk, is there anyone standing by for open public comment?
Madam Mayor, we do have two members of the public who have raised their hand. Folks who are calling in, we do ask you to raise your hand within the app if you wish to speak on a particular item. So we're now on the general public comment portion. If you have trouble raising your hand, you can send me a question within the app and let me know which item you'd like to speak on. So we do have two people, Madam Mayor, who have raised their hand for this item, Margie Agavi and Sarah York Rubin. Margie, will go ahead with you. Please unmute yourself. You have 3 minutes. Please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members. This is Margie Ayavi, and I'm the Executive Director for the Santa Barbara Education Foundation. But today I'm talking with you in my capacity as the chairperson of the City Arts Advisory Committee. And one of our responsibilities as a committee is to make recommendations to the council regarding the city cultural art. Are we okay? Okay, so I know these are tough times for everybody, and you're in the unenviable position to make sure that
you would have to join webinar. And
is that somebody else talking?
Anyway, I think so. We'll keep
access
going
to the
and then
city
give you
website
extra time.
directly to it.
I just want to remind you that the arts are perhaps more important now than ever before. Today on NPR, I heard a piece about first responders and second responders. First responders save lives, but second responders support the first responders by managing, returning services, and cleaning up sites during and after an event that requires first responders. So empowering second responders helps make the difference between lingering disruption and the timely restoration of daily life. And so I want you to, I'm asking you to please remember that the arts are vital second responders. and the arts can and will revive our lives. So today, as you consider the budget, please remember that the line item for city cultural arts grants supports about 75 local arts and culture nonprofits and helps to employ thousands of people. Annually, our nonprofit arts sector generates about $8 million in local tax revenue. And money invested in the arts stays local, with every dollar invested generating about $4 in return. So the nonprofit art sector is here to partner with the city in these challenging times, and we really thank you for your continued support of the arts and our communities. Thank you very much.
Ms. Yayavi, that item is on our official agenda. Am I correct about that, Mr. Casey? So this open public comment is for items that are not on the agenda, but I didn't want to interrupt you. Thank you for what you had to say. Ms. York-Rubin, if you can hold until we get to the mayor and council budget, which includes the arts funding as Ms. Yayavi referenced, then please hold your comments until we get there officially. Thanks. Ms. Clerk, go ahead.
Madam Mayor and Council, Sarah York-Rubin is the only person with a hand up remaining for the public comment item. So okay. no other public, and it's now down. So no other speakers for public comment.
Okay. Thank you. A very well-spoken comment that we did get. So thanks. Let's see. Okay, that closes the open public comment, and we'll go to our item. We have one. Ms. Clerk, can you read that into the record?
Yes. Item 1, fiscal year 2021 recommended operating and capital budget.
Okay, Mr. Casey, you're here to kick us off on this very important juncture in our calendar year, our fiscal year. We're all ears. Take it away.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. Good to see you again. Seems like we were just here. So this kicks off our budget review cycle now. For the next 3 weeks, we have a number of hearings and budget days to spend with you to have the departments go over their budget process. This is going to be unlike any other budget season that we've had because we are having to take dramatic action in response to the economic aspects of this crisis and the fiscal impact it is having on the city revenues in particular. So this is challenging in that we released a budget document that was the formerly aspirational budget document moving into fiscal year 2021. And what you will see departments go through now is a recalibration of that budget to come up with a plan to reduce expenditures to balance to our local budget needs. We are a local government. We have to pass a balanced budget. It's in the city charter, and we also don't have the benefit of printing money and being able to get away with that. So we'll walk through that. I have a little introduction just to kind of frame where we're at from a budget perspective. And so we'll go ahead and get started with that now. If you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the overview of today's presentation is the budget approach that we're going to take. I do want to pause real quick and mention that we are recommending a little different departmental overview and a reorganization of the city structure. So let me just pause here and talk about that. Today, we're going to cover the city administrator's office, mayor and council's budget, information technology, human resources, and a new sustainability and resiliency department. As you may recall, our administrative services director took a promotion in another community, and that created a vacancy about a year ago now. And since that time, I have been evaluating whether I want to change the way we are organizationally structured to meet our current needs for the foreseeable future. Gave us a good opportunity to do so. And so what the proposed budget has, and what I'd still like to move forward with, but in a more contingency manner, is a reorganization. I'd like to eliminate the administrative services department and eliminate that department head position, and then reallocate the divisions in a different way. So today you will see that I'm recommending that we create an information technology department but not fill a new director. So same staffing as now, but to designate that as a standalone department to recognize the importance of technology in an organization of our size and complexity going forward. And then same with human resources. It's pretty uncommon that we don't have a human resources department. So I'm going to take what was formerly the division and make human resources a standalone department, again, with the same staffing level. So there's no additional staffing that comes with that, but there would be a reclassification of the human resources manager to a human resources director. And again, for a size and complex organization like us, I think that's extremely valuable and important. So those two changes are fairly straightforward, but then I'm recommending that we create a new department, and we'll talk about that more later in the budget presentation, but it's called the Sustainability and Resiliency Department. Again, I'm not recommending any new staffing positions, but reallocating divisions from different departments to this new organizational structure. And I will talk about that more, but it's really trying to meet the policy direction and guidance that council has set and the goals you have set for us as an organization and as a community going forward. So I think it's time that we organize ourselves accordingly as well. So you'll see those flesh out today. But again, the important thing to remember is we've eliminated a full department and an executive management team, and these organizational changes do not add any new positions or cost. I'm holding off on those until the budget settles down and we're able to execute on those. And I would have to bring that back to you all for approval on that. So that is just a little framework on the reorganization structure, but we'll talk briefly about the status quo budget, but spend most of our time on budget adjustment options and how we're responding to the fiscal crisis, and talk about the work plan for the upcoming year. One other thing before we keep going, for council and the community, these budget work sessions that we have through the month of May now are your opportunity to dig deep in the departments. It's a chance for the departments to share who they are, what they do, the complexity of their operations. I'll let you ask questions, not just budget, but also policy-wise or program-wise of what they're working on. It's a really good opportunity to take your time and dig into the departments and ask any and all questions that you might have about their operations. What we ask you to do is to ask questions, give us feedback, especially on the reductions that we're proposing. We're not looking for final actions, though. I think it's important that you kind of see the entirety of a whole as it comes together back in early June when we do ask you for kind of final direction and guidance. So please give us your feedback, chime in, tell us if we seem to be heading in the right direction or not. I will caution you that in a reduction scenario, it's harder. It's more fun to add programs and be responsive to new needs, and that's not where we're at now. And everyone's going to have to participate in the reduction measures, and you'll see that theme kind of throughout all the department presentations, and that includes the outside entities as well. If I'm asking departments to make substantial reductions, I don't see how we can't ask our partners that we help fund to do the same. And so that's our approach in that regard. Next slide, please. So we showed this to you when we released the budget at the end of April. We continue to monitor our revenues very closely as data comes in. We think this is still a decent revenue assumption to be working this budget off of. The bottom line is that for the remainder of this fiscal year 20, we're looking at about a $16 million shortfall expected losses. That's the the top blue line under the expected losses column. 4 million of that is Measure C. So we'll talk about how we adjust Measure C. So that leaves a general fund deficit that we're going to have to absorb about 12.3 million. That is just for this fiscal year between now and the end. And that is from significant losses in sales tax, property tax to some extent, but substantially sales tax and bed tax. And then for fiscal year 21, that's the right side of this chart. You will see our projected losses for that fiscal year to be about $12.8 million, less $3 million for Measure C, which gets you to the bottom right corner of a deficit of about $9.7 million for fiscal year 21. So that is what we need to budget against, and I'll talk about our strategy in the upcoming slides. Next slide, please. So what are we doing for this fiscal year to get at that gap that we just showed? We are holding vacant positions open very aggressively. We are deferring capital expenditures that we're able to do. We're putting a slowdown, if not a stop, on any non-essential spending. and we're using some reserves. And we'll talk about reserves in a couple slides more, but we were fortunate to go into this crisis with well-funded reserves, both disaster reserves and also contingency reserves. But I think we're going to have to hit those reserves to get through this fiscal year. And most of our contingency reserves, we think, will get used up. And I'll talk about that in the slide to come. Next slide, please. And then for fiscal 21, what you're going to see presenting now are the service reduction components and the deferral of capital expenditure components to the balancing strategy that I'm recommending to you. So those will be a first round of what we think we are looking to target at. We also feel we're going to need some labor concessions from our bargaining units to help balance. And so we will be looking at that, and we are working with the labor units to begin those conversations. We'll have more discussions with them. And we think a prudent use of disaster reserves is in order to help get us through this crisis. This is why you have disaster reserves. It helps you to manage your way through. It is not an ongoing operational pot of money to use. They are one-time reserves to use for one-time measures while you right-size the organization or an economic recovery comes out. I will mention on both of those that we are not assuming any state or federal relief because it's still unknown at this time whether that's going to occur. There certainly is conversations occurring at both the state and the federal level to do so. All local governments are facing this fiscal challenge. I had a meeting with all the city managers and the county CEO of the county this morning. We're all in the same boat to a varying degree, and we're all taking a very similar approach to budget balance through this. And part of that is we will adopt a budget in June, but we will continue to closely monitor it, and we will probably come back with midstream adjustments, unlike other years that are substantial in nature, just to reflect either positive or negative variances to the program that we adopt. Do revenues come in higher or lower than what we expect? Do we get any federal or state relief? And how does that factor into our process as well? So for now, we are not assuming any outside help. So that would be a benefit if that does come to be. Next slide, please. So just a quick talk about reserves. The Finance Committee got a deep dive on this yesterday. Bottom line, if you look at the top two charts, the dark blue and then the light blue, the dark blue is your disaster reserves, which is about 15% of our general fund operating budget. And the lighter blue is a contingency reserve of 10% on top of that. So council since 2012 and even going further back had a 25% goal of a reserve for the general fund. That is a good level of reserves. It's probably a little bit higher than the average in local government. And it was established because being an economy that does rely on tourism to a decent amount, the fluctuations can be dramatic. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. We are seeing the city of Santa Barbara budget being hit to a harder extent than maybe some other local governments that don't rely quite so much on bed tax as a balancing measure. Then you will notice that starting in 2005, we were getting below the policy levels on reserves. There's a line that goes across the top. That is the 15 and 10% levels for a total of 25%. So you can see from 2005 until about 2015, we were below our policy reserves. It took discipline to balance the budget and have excess money left over to go into reserves to help replenish them. And so I credit former councils in having the discipline to do that, such that we got to fully funded reserves in FY 15 and 16 for the first time in over 10 years. So that was a great accomplishment, and I'm really fortunate that we were in that spot. You saw the remaining couple years that it dipped ever so slightly below, and that is getting through the Thomas fire and debris flow and the loss in revenue that we had during that critical shopping season. And so we had to dip modestly into reserves of just $1 million or $2 million. And so again, really well managed city fiscally to get through that crisis and still come out of that with reserves pretty much intact. But this is going to be different. And so those last two columns, you'll see FY20. At this point, we're expecting having to use most of our contingency reserves. Again, we are going to try to save as much revenue as we can and expenditures that we can between now and the end of the fiscal year. We had about a $12 million shortfall that we're estimating. At worst case is if we weren't able to do anything, we'd have to take the $12 million from reserves. I think we're going to be able to carve out $2-3 million of savings in the last couple months of the fiscal year to help minimize the amount of reserves. But I think realistically, we're going to use most of our contingency reserves. And then next year, we will be left essentially with our disaster reserves. And so again, I think it's appropriate to use some of those during this crisis to help balance the budget, but I think it should be a prudent use and something that maintains some reserve balance for future scenarios that we can't predict today exactly where we'll be a year from now, 2 years from now, or 3 years from now. So that's our use of reserve approach to go to a balanced budget package that we're putting together for you. Next slide, please. This just kind of gave a real high-level approach of what we're looking at. I don't want to get focused on any numbers because it just shows different scenarios and magnitudes of what we're looking at. But it does just show that we are looking at reduction of departmental spending, deferring capital, and some labor concessions. Again, we do not have labor concessions in hand, and so that's something we'll have to come up with a balanced approach as we move forward. Next slide, please. So budget calendar. So these are the hearings that we have coming up. They come up fast and furious. We took a extra week and condensed some of the hearings just because it's moving so fast in departments. It's a lot of work to put together a whole new budget with basically 1 month's time, especially in a reduction scenario. So as I said, today we'll talk City Administrator's Office, Mayor and Council, information technology and its new departmental framework, but really no change from how it was as a division. Same with human resources. And then we'll talk about how we're combining a couple of programs into a new department. Again, not with any new expenditures to support that. But I do believe it's good to kind of get the organizational framework where we want it to be for the long-term growth of the organization. The next Monday, we'll have airport and waterfront. And we're going to slip in capital planning as well, because that usually comes with Public Works, which is a very large department. So just looking to kind of manage our commitments of time, you will see us slot in the capital planning on Monday, May 18th as well. Then at the council meeting on Tuesday, May 19th, we'll do Parks and Recreation, which will include the creeks and golf funds in addition. Wednesday, May 20th, we'll talk public safety with the fire and police departments. And then also cover some general administrative departments like finance, general government, and the city attorney's office. Next slide, please. Then Wednesday, May 27th, we will have the library department and public works. So that will be a long hearing just because public works is such a large department within the city as its own. And then we'll do library on top of that. We will do community development on June 2nd. I'm happy to report council is very interested in getting the NOVAC report, which is kind of the internal organizational analysis of the land development process and community development. The consultant will be able to give us their preliminary findings, so we'll be able to dovetail that into the budget considerations as well. So you will have that come to you on June 2nd. And then Monday, June 8th is when we will come back and kind of present to you this package and kind of have final numbers, look at final revenues one more time to make sure we're still in the right mindset about where we need to be for reduction. And we'll put a staff recommendation together for your consideration and direction to staff. And just functionally, we need that kind of final guidance for us then to go and put the package together of a budget document to get officially approved. And so Tuesday, June 9th, you'll have some utility rate increase required hearings, but then on June 18th, we adopt the budget. And we are required by the charter to adopt the budget before the end of the fiscal year, which ends on June 30th. So that's kind of the big picture. Happy to answer any questions about process or mindset going into this. And if not, then we will start the departmental presentations. Thank you.
Any questions? I don't see anyone step. Okay. Oh, Ms. Johnson's on hand to answer. Okay. Ms. Harmon, do you have a question on the segment that was just presented?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I'm just not sure if now is the right time to ask it. With regard to the new structure of your office, Mr. Casey, we're going to get into that more later, or was this?
It's the next segment.
It is the next one.
Right. Go ahead, Mr. Casey.
The mayor and I have to pause before we turn our mics on, so that's why. I just want to make sure we're answering your question. So yes, we are going to present to you the new Resiliency and Sustainability Department and why we have that vision and what we hope to accomplish. And then in the next few presentations, you will hear from the Human Resources and the Information Technology Department. Is that what you're asking, Ms. Harmon?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I can ask the questions as those departments come forward. Okay, thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Casey. We're ready for City Administrator's Office. Thanks.
Okay. Hello, Madam Mayor and City Council. My name is Nina Johnson. I'm the Senior Assistant to the City Administrator, and I will be presenting the budget recommended for the upcoming year for the City Administrator's Office and also for the Mayor and Council's Office, and then we will be going to the City Clerk. So first, if we can go to the next slide. I want to give a quick overview of our employee positions. Within the City Administrator's Office, we have two programs, what we know of as the City Administrator's staff in our office, and then we also have City Television. So those two programs comprise the City Administrator's Office. So if we look at our employee positions in our current year, just to show kind of the differences between that Mr. Casey was referring to, we currently in this fiscal year have 6 employees in the City Administrator's Office and 2.25 employees in City TV. So 8 regular employees plus 3 hourly employees in City TV to help with televising meetings and special program productions. Next slide. In the next year, what we're looking at is a few more positions in the City Administrator's Office, the same number of positions in City TV, and you see the addition of 3.5 positions added from the City Clerk's Office. So for a total of 14 regular employees plus an hour employee in City TV. Next slide. Overall, this is a summary of our recommended budget. The projected budget shows how much we project to spend in this current fiscal year. The FY21 original plan was what is presented in the 2-year financial plan that Council reviewed last year. And then the FY21 recommended budget is what you see in, I'll use my other visual aid, in the printed publication that is available online and distributed. Altogether, about 75% of our budget is salaries and benefits because we are an administrative office and we don't have large equipment expenses. About 20% is in supplies and services and allocated costs. So all of our phones, custodial, and so forth, other professional services contracts. Next slide. If we look at the activities in the City Administrator's Office, overall, we manage city departments with over 1,000 full-time and part-time employees. We oversee the council agenda process and the review of staff reports from all departments. We coordinate state and federal legislative advocacy on a variety of matters, and that involves review of our legislative platform. And we also coordinate our performance management program. We work with every department to determine what their performance objectives are going to be for each year and how we're going to measure their performance. We also do a number of things to support intergovernmental relations. That includes the county, other agencies that are our neighbors, the school district, Santa Barbara City College, and so forth. Next slide. We oversee citywide communications. That includes our website, our homepage, working with departments on updates to their various websites, our digital communication via email, social media sites. We work with all departments on 30 social media accounts and help them with their posts. The city also has Twitter and Facebook accounts that we publish information on a regular basis. Various publications from the water bill insert to special publications, presentations like the State of the City and other high visibility presentations that we develop, and television programming. Also, we are looking at, we've enhanced our economic development coordination citywide, working with different departments and outreach to the business community. And we also oversee arts, special events, and community promotion funding and programming. Next slide. So I mentioned performance objectives. What we are looking at for the upcoming year in our work plan is doing the same budgeting process again next year for the fiscal year 22 budget, so that we are making plans for preparing the State of the City presentation. This year, due to the coronavirus situation and the cancellation of events, we were unable to move forward with that presentation, but we expect to do that next year pending the progress of our situation and holding events. Issuing the city news in brief on a weekly basis. We send our weekly newsletter out to over 30,000 people in our community with various updates and event notices and project updates. We also will be engaging stakeholders in implementing plans for economic recovery and revitalization. What we have in our budget document was focused more on revitalizing the downtown area and helping commercial areas, but now with the coronavirus and the onset of the public health crisis, we're looking at what we can do to help businesses survive and our recovery efforts. Next slide. Also, our office works closely with finance to implement a Measure C spending plan, making sure that transparency measures are met, and scheduling and providing support for a citizen oversight committee. And then we have a 2021 redistricting effort coming up and that we're making plans for. So we will be working in partnership with the city attorney's office to do the legal and demographic portions, recruiting those services to implement that effort. So that will be coming up next year. Next slide. We will also be working with the remaining license holder to open a final recreational cannabis storefront, and that will be happening by June of next year. So this is the remaining storefront at State and Ontario. Next slide. If we look at City TV, overall, the general activities and responsibilities of that area, televising our city meetings, including City Council, Ordinance Committee, Finance Committee, and certain advisory groups. We also televise meetings for the City of Goleta. We provide video production help and services for city departments and on a certain basis for outside organizations occasionally. We produce online video streaming content on the city website, and we've really taken that to a whole new level with all of our remote meetings. Next slide. Looking at the upcoming year, we were going to be preparing 25 videos, we estimate, to highlight city services, events, and programs. You see these that go out in our online newsletters. We send them out each week. So we make use of our website portal and the newsletters to share those videos. We also post them on social media sites, and we find that they help to educate people about our various programs. And then on the technical side, our City TV staff maintain the broadcast system. So we have to make sure that all of the equipment is maintained and invest in those equipment purchases just to make sure that we're able to keep all of our meetings broadcast. And then we're also leading up to a project this year to design and purchase the audio system for council chambers. Our system is about 10 years old in council chambers, so we're going to be looking at replacing that system. Next slide. On the revenue side of what pays for the equipment and the project I just mentioned to replace the audio system, we have revenue that comes to City TV and to TVSB from the PEG fee on cable bills. So what's called the Public Education and Governmental Access fee, and it's a 1% charge on those services. It generates about $132,000 for City TV equipment and the same amount for equipment for TVSB. So half and half are split between both of our agencies. Next slide. If we look at, Mr. Casey mentioned that we were looking at various options in terms of budget adjustments to meet the projected revenue shortfalls. In our office, we're looking at keeping a full-time administrative specialist position vacant. So this is a position that served right in the front area of our office and helped people with a number of customer service questions and concerns. And then also we're looking at reducing our overall supplies and cutting our meeting and travel budgets. Altogether, you see the amounts there listed at 140,800. So that equates to a 5% reduction in our budget. Next slide. The impacts of making those adjustments will have less clerical support for the city administrator's office. And as you know, with our close relationship with the mayor and council's office right around the corner, that's really less clerical support for our entire office. So that can be felt from time to time. Also less staff support to assist with website and email updates. A lot of our communication support occurs in that position. So we will see less of that if we leave that position vacant. In terms of reducing our supplies and services, meeting and travel costs, that means fewer conferences and professional development opportunities, although we are seeing more of these conferences and events transitioning to a virtual format. So maybe more of these will be provided at a lower cost. Next slide. Going to the mayor and council's office. And we'll continue. This program altogether contains 2 programs. This number may seem high, but that's only because it's the mayor and council's office, which is salaries of only about $650,000, and much of the remainder is all of our arts and community promotions funding. So there's about 2.6 million here, and I'm going to be detailing that in a moment, for arts and community promotion organizations and grant funding. If we look at what has happened here, so a few years ago, we consolidated all of the city's contributions to arts, events, festivals, community promotion. We had it in various departments. We consolidated everything in one program so that we could really have a united area where all of this funding was located and could be managed. Our status quo budget was 2.6 million. We have not made any adjustments to that. So over the years, it's been a few years that we have made increases, and generally we've increased or decreased for across the board for all arts organizations. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is a detailed summary of this funding. So I'm going to start at the top and just quickly go through the list, and then I have a couple other slides just in case council has any questions. First, the largest contract in there is Visit Santa Barbara, who provides tourism marketing services. We also have the Visitor Center. This is the Visitor Center on Garden Street. We provide $59,000 for the chamber to manage the Visitor Center. I mentioned TVSB, and I was previously talking about the $132,000 in capital funding, but we also provide $313,000 for operations. So you can see the total amount. Major festivals, we provide $258,000 for major festivals that have historic and have been in our community for many years. They include Old Spanish Days, the Film Festival, Summer Solstice, the 4th of July Parade. We also provide funding for the County Office of Arts and Culture staff, $151,000. That pays for half of their staff support team. They provide guidance and resources to arts organizations in the community. We also contract with them to staff our City Arts Advisory Committee. So those meetings, while we have not held them in a month or two, that group meets bi-monthly and provides guidance on those efforts. They also provide staff support to the Events and Festivals Committee. So that group looks at funding for events and festivals. The next row is grants for arts organizations, events, and festivals. So this is isolating all of the grant funds the city distributes out and available for application for community organizations in these areas. So that's about over $300,000 for grant funding. And then we have other various dues and special projects, the Economic Community Project, Economic Forecast, and so forth. So for a total of 2.6 million. This is a slide just so you can see a breakdown of those grants, because I wanted council to be aware of what we have in our budget: the organizational development grants, events and festivals grants, community arts. And then we also have a pot of money, very small, I need to say 18,000 for the cultural district and other projects that our county arts staff contribute to. This is where we have funding for a number of joint collaborative projects. So sculptures on State Street, where we take from these funds and partner with different organizations in the community to make projects like that happen. Next slide. And this is a quick breakdown of those grants with the amounts. You can see that each one of those, so for 48,000 community arts grants, that's about 18 organizations receiving grants of 1 to 5,000, organizational development grants of 5 to 18,000, and so forth. And the events and festival, that's 11 organizations receiving $3,000 to $15,000 grants. Next slide. So altogether, what we are doing is in this program, administering funding to community and arts organizations who are receiving those grant funds and ensuring the contract compliance. We work with arts organizations and committees, or we want to and have been discussing how we clarify roles and restructure our funding for arts and events, update our review processes for art proposals. How do we make sure that all of our proposed art projects we have an efficient process, especially in conjunction with our design review boards. And then I mentioned a rotating exhibit of sculptures on State Street. The County Office of Arts and Culture, you will remember the mobile libraries that were out on display and then moved to other communities. So that was previously a collaborative effort, the last one. And then ensuring also we work with the Community Arts Workshop and Moxie. Those are city properties and we ensure that they're in compliance with their lease. Next slide. Here, if we look at our overall options for reducing our budget, we just looked at an across the board 5% reduction in these funds. If we instead of going through each and every organization, we looked at what amount would we generate if we just asked each organization to reduce their total budget and made 5% less available in grant funding for all the categories I mentioned before. So that would give us a savings of $127,000. Next slide. If we look at, meeting and travel budget, that is another one for $20,000. It didn't appear on the last slide. Similar to the city administrator's office, go back. Yes. So if we eliminate meeting and travel for the mayor and council, similar to the city administrator's office, that would be a savings of $20,000. We'd have fewer conferences and meeting opportunities. More of those are transitioning to a virtual format. If we look at reducing funding for the arts and community promotion organizations and those grants, we are seeing many organizations transitioning to virtual formats, and they're interacting more in situations like this on Zoom and GoToMeeting. So they are still making plans and coordinating events, but not doing it in a large group setting that we're all so accustomed to. And eventually, we want to make sure that they are in a stable position to begin a phased approach to be hosting community events again, because it's a very important part of our economic vitality. Overall, if we reduce our funding for these organizations, we're going to have less funding for tourism marketing services. And that's especially combined with less TBID, the Tourism Business Improvement District assessment revenue. Less of that revenue is coming in from hotels. So we just want to keep that in mind. I would anticipate I'm putting no funding for sculptures on State Street, but that would be a creative approach. If we wanted to come up with funding for that type of project, we would need to figure that out. So I would assume we're not going to have the funding to put art on those sculpture pads, and then reduced small grant funding for arts organizations and supportive arts advisory committees. So we'd have to figure out what a 5% reduction in those funds, in those services means. Next slide. This is overall, I had a detailed breakdown, but altogether, these are all of the contracts, again, that we have, just in case that we need. Next slide. Okay. And I think we're going to go to questions at the very end. So I'm going to transition to City Clerk Services Manager, Sarah Gorman.
And if I could jump in real quick, Madam Mayor. First, I don't think I failed to mention that departments are going to be presenting to you around 5% reduction scenarios. Again, I think with the package of reduction of capital, reduction of services, some labor concessions, and some modest use of reserves, that's kind of the framework we're in to meet that $9 million budget gap that I identified earlier. So you'll see, as Ms. Johnson showed here and as other departments will show, that that's the range of what they're showing. We are doing the preparation work that if we have to go further in the fiscal year, we're starting to think about that. But for now, we think this is the ballpark we're in. And then for the last year or so, Ms. Gorman in the City Clerk's office has been reporting to me with the loss of the Administrative Services Director. And so this budget is just kind of formalizing that relationship. So I failed to mention it because it's already kind of embedded in my DNA that Sarah reports directly to me and the clerk's office does as well. And it makes sense because my title is actually City Administrator / City Treasurer / City Clerk. And so, but I appreciate working with her, and that's why you're seeing her now as part of this budget.
Mr. Casey, Ms. Gorman, I was going to ask if any of the council members had questions at this point. That was a lot of information presented by Ms. Johnson. Ms. Nedden, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just had a question about for the council office travel budget. That also is what we would use for any interns. And if, I don't know, I guess it's a question about if maybe that some of that could be preserved for that. I think it's a really valuable service we provide for young people interested in civil service. So can that be separated out, or does that just, and did you say eliminate that budget? Or was it a 5% reduction of that budget? That's the question.
Ms. Johnson?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Snedden, we included that as the only portion of the mayor and council program that we thought could be reduced. So it's not really 5% of the overall mayor and council budget. It's, I can crunch the numbers, it's a little bit, it's much less. But if the mayor and council program, if your office wanted to contribute to reaching that 5% reduction, that's pretty much the only discretionary funding in your office budget. And you are correct that some council members, and it depends over the years, have used that discretionary funding instead of for meeting and travel, but for hourly interns. I don't think we have too much of that occurring now, but we looked at meeting and travel as an area that generally we're not having very many conferences or paid events and gatherings. So that seemed like an area that we would be able to contribute.
And that, yeah, I understand. So if we did decide to have an intern, could we pay that out of our own salary, or would there just be a mechanism for doing that? I just want to, it doesn't have to be answered now, but I think even if that is eliminated, I think to have that mechanism to be able to, from our own resources, I'd like to preserve that.
Yes.
Okay, we'll take a note of that, Ms. Johnson. Thanks for that contribution. Mr. Jordan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have a couple questions. There's a set of slides, but in particular one, the City Administrator's Office performance objectives, and then you have some performance objectives for others too. When do those get set up, and what role does council play or not play in those? Are those left over from last year, the 2-year budget process, or how do these appear as being the objectives for the City Administrator's Office?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Jordan, these are, so in every department, we try to list performance objectives that reflect about 80% roughly of all of our work that we're trying to accomplish. So there are many work efforts underway and planning to be underway that may not be listed. These are the big items. The budget process lasts for months, and the amount of time and staff that goes into that. So these are the larger efforts. that are listed. And these are what went into our recommended budget. So all of these efforts are going to be impacted by any reductions that we see going forward, and that council eventually gives direction on, if that answers your question. But we did try to highlight some special projects in here that are new and different from the previous years.
So it's not for me to go, hey, the one I was thinking of isn't there. There are others, right?
There are many others.
Okay.
This is an office that oversees a number of projects and participates in department efforts. Many high priority projects are coordinated in our office. They are not all listed.
Okay, then I have just one other question back when you were talking about the section for arts and economic vitality. Then you have and you make the statement on one of those bullets there that fiscal year 21 will be a status quo budget. You show the next page, you show the funding summary where it's 2.6 million. You go on to talk about that. And then you eventually get to a page where you talk about 5% reduction service level impacts as if they might happen or would happen. And then on the following page again, you still show the 2.6. Is the proposal to maintain the 2.6, but you're just warning us if we wanted more reductions, what the impacts would be?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Jordan, what all of our departments are doing is we were asked to present options if council wished to reduce our operating budgets by 5%. If we were to do that, what would that look like? So we're putting out some measures that would equate to 5%. And I am assuming Mr. Casey may want to jump in, but if council decides that a 5% reduction is needed to meet our revenue shortfalls, these are the options that we would likely be going to. And I think that
Mr. Casey.
So the $2.6 million is the number you're proposing to meet budget.
I'm going to hold this up. That is the status quo budget. It was no change from the prior year. It's what went into our publication. If there are no adjustments to our budget, that is going to be the total amount of funding there, unless council decides to reduce.
Madam Mayor, council members, I think I'm off camera because their slots are all full. This is Paul Casey, City Administrator. I would recommend a 5% reduction to the outside entities. I think it's only fair if we are looking at reducing our city services, which I think are also important, that they share in that balanced budgeting approach as well. So my recommendation is that we do ask them for a 5% reduction. At the end of the day, it's up to City Council to make that determination. And if you do not want us to make that recommendation, you can do that, and then we'll have to find additional cuts elsewhere to make up that balance.
Okay, I guess I'm being confused by the sequence of your slides. As if there would be as if you're proposing a status quo, but you're warning about a 5% impact, but then you're following that up with another slide that shows it's the same.
And I think what Ms. Johnson was saying, we just wanted to have that program funding summary because it's a large number, $2.6 million that you contribute general fund to different groups, but I will be recommending a 5% reduction to all of them.
Okay, and then just one down in the weeds question. Has there been a decision on Old Spanish Days? And if so, why would that still be on the list?
And Madam Mayor, council members, I do not want to speak for Old Spanish Days. I think they are meeting next week to talk about their fiesta coming up. So I think it'd be premature for me to say what my conversations have been. And that's a question for a lot of these events. You know, these are nonprofits that are working. Their events may not be occurring in their old manner, but they have carrying costs as well. And I think that's a judgment call for you all to weigh in on. If you want us to ask for more money back if the events don't occur. My feeling is they've got financial troubles as well, because usually they make money off the events and that's not happening. So I was just recommending a 5% reduction, but I think it's a fair question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Mr. Jordan, I'm going to hold this up. So on page D9 is the performance objectives for the city administrator's office. So if you all have your budget binders with you, you'll find all of the departments that we're looking at today with some of the performance measures. I think the numbers might not be the same as what we're looking at, but definitely the function and the performance measures are in there. So moving on to Mr. Freedman and his questions on the section that we just covered. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll start with kind of piggybacking on where Councilmember Jordan just was. In terms of the, I think it's slide 29 or so, when we're looking at the different funding for the different arts programs, is if the events don't go forward, is there a way instead of 5% cuts that we would reallocate some portion of that to other art support grants? In particular, the special projects, we might be able to implement that. And where I'm going with this is that if we are looking seriously at opening up State Street as a pedestrian mall, we have to have some types of attractions to bring people down there, not just restaurants. And if and when we get to that time, that we do have that, we want to make a good first impression, and the arts is one way to do that. So that might be the draw to make the opening of State Street to pedestrians work, as well as some other things within the arts. So I really want to understand that better. I think we'll have more information, such as Old Spanish Days, if we could do some reductions and transplant into other areas. For arts, for the arts, especially projects that could come in. So I want to look at that. My other couple of questions are the visitor center as well. It's for visitors. We don't have visitors for a certain amount of time, but I know there's carrying costs with that. There's a lot of fixed costs with that too. Another question I had is in terms of the redistricting effort that was mentioned for 21. Is that related in any way to this year's census? In understanding that data, is it predicated on 2020 U.S. Census data? And being that the U.S. Census has been delayed, is there any indication or any impacts to that effort, our own local one?
Ms.
Madam
Johnson?
Mayor, Councilmember Freedman, yes, it is based on census data. I'm not sure of the impact of any delays, but yes, it is related.
Okay, so we'll have to monitor that to see when that, because that effort for our own redistricting efforts in 2021 might actually be delayed depending on what happens this year with our 2020 census. The other question I had, it's actually, forgive me, it's related to the original presentation from Mr. Casey, just in terms of our actual budget numbers that we're looking at, and I believe it was slide 3. Just wanted a clarification. When we're looking at the expected losses of 12 million minus the 3 for Measure C, so we're at 9.7 million. I understand this year the 12.3 million for this fiscal year because everything's shut down, but it seems that's only 3 months, and it seems to me a little counterintuitive that we could have this prolonged event and it's less for an entire year, because it seems like we had 3/4 of our year already done, so it should only been a quarter. And what do you base this 9.7 on? And is it in particular, is it based on a reopening of, say, hotels or restaurants starting in June where we're getting new revenue? And if that is extended past June or even into July, would that number quickly grow?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councilman Freedman. That is one of the great challenges everyone in local government finance is dealing with, is how to project what next year is going to be like. So what the assumptions for fiscal 21 is a gradual reopening with a slow summer that then builds into a kind of recession era type revenue situation. If we stay on lockdown for a substantial portion of next fiscal year, that's where I'm recommending we're gonna have to come back and make further adjustments in the fall to address that. But for now, we're assuming that we are starting a reopening effort come July 1 when the fiscal year starts. And I still think for the most part, that seems to be where the state is heading as well. What we're seeing now is a complete shutdown. You're seeing your bed tax revenues go to essentially zero. You're seeing all your retail stores essentially closed. Whereas we think next fiscal year, you're going to have some economic activity that's going to be painful and difficult, but it won't be quite as drastic as April and May have been.
Okay. And then the last question, I know we talked about reserve levels in this, and we talked about this at finance yesterday, is the use of the contingency this year, but I just want to confirm this for my colleagues in the public, we are looking at what is the appropriate level of emergency reserves to spend next year, and to try to find that level because we would need that. So appreciate, it goes right into this question we have right here, is we need to be prudent with our whatever our reserve level for our emergency reserves is, because we don't know what that 9.7 million number is actually going to be. So just want to point that out. Thank you.
Councilmember Alejandra Gutierrez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As Nina was going through her presentation, thank you, by the way, I have one question for Paul, but I'm going to start with the questions I have for Nina. How much money currently do we have in the Measure C funding, and how much was spent this year, and how much do we plan to spend next year? If that's information that we can obtain, I would really appreciate it. And then how much does Goleta pay into the city TV department? And then how much is the system going to cost the TV from the TV department? How much is that going to cost? Because you mentioned there's, we're coming up to 10 years and we're going to have to buy some new equipment. And then for Mr. Casey, is there a way that we can get, based on the new positions that the city administration office is going to get, is there a way that we can have an outline of the organization chart and how much each position is currently paid as of right now, and what it's going to look like after you do the new hires?
Yeah, I'll start. I think I've been clear that there aren't new hires, and so I'm not exactly sure what you're looking for there.
So so there's new hires. Let me, in the new positions that you're going, so on your slide, city administrator, I don't know if you can see this, but it says
What number is the slide? It's in the corner.
So those two slides where it says city administrator office 6.05, and then on the other slide it says 8.60. I just want to, I'm a visual learner. I just want to be able to see how the department is structured now, how much everybody's getting paid, and then how it's going to restructure after the new positions you're proposing.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and Ms. Johnson can clarify. I believe that is merely moving the city clerk's operations under the city administrator's office. So those are existing positions and existing operation that existed in another department, and merely for organizational sake, they'll now report directly to me. And so we've just moved them in from a budget standpoint into our office. They're not new bodies or new expenditures to the city. Ms. Johnson, did I have that correct?
And I understand that. I just need, and maybe I'm taking too much time, but if you can just give me the information of how much those positions cost and where they stand in the organization chart, and how they're going to be moved. And it's, again, I'm a visual learner. And also, if you can speak on, is there a possibility of maybe hiring within the city a part-time or even full-time bilingual communication staff?
Yeah, let me answer that, and also I want to answer your Measure C question. Mr. Ford, if you can go back to slide 3, let me get Measure C, because that was one of your earlier questions as well. Slide 3. So slide 3 is kind of a very high-level summary, but it shows Measure C sales tax. Post-COVID, we're looking at about $20,800,000. It's there on the second line of that chart. And so Measure C is And then in FY21, we're forecasting it to be about $22.5 million, $3 million less than what we had originally called for. Just to remind everyone, Measure C is the 1-cent sales tax for infrastructure that the voters approved, and we're still recommending that that stay dedicated to infrastructure costs at that point as well. So I hope that answers your Measure C. We'll certainly get you the positions within the city administrator's office and their costs. That's all public information. Happy to do so. And
Yes.
then, and then adding an additional position. Always at council's direction if you want to add an additional position. We did that 2 years ago. We put that position in the fire department, which is now filled by Liliana Encinas. That came directly out of the Thomas Fire and Debris Flow about wanting to increase our commitment to bilingual outreach. If council, the 4 of you want to add an additional position on top of that, we can do so. We will have to find the funding to do that. We are in a serious financial situation, so you're going to have to balance and find us further areas to reduce if we're going to add a position in this climate.
Okay, thank you. And is there a way that we can also obtain the breakdown of the expenses that we've had from Measure C?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I meant to. That will occur on Monday when we do the capital and Measure C. We will go thoroughly into Measure C. Absolutely. That is coming at Monday's presentation.
I'm the new girl on the block, so I will be asking a lot of questions that most of you probably have the answers to. But thank you so much for the presentation.
Madam Mayor?
Please don't worry about taking time. That's what these budget hearings are for. Did we get all of Ms. Gutierrez's questions?
Madam Mayor,
Okay,
I have an answer to one more of the questions. The audio system in council chambers in the David Gebhard room, they're getting replaced at a cost of $25,000. And this is a cost that's funded from the PEG fee revenue from cable services.
And does Goleta contribute to the TV department at all?
Yes. Also, it's about $24,000.
Okay.
So we have an annual
$24,000 a year.
with the city of Goleta to tape and televise their meetings.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Gutierrez, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sorry, I logged out there for a second because the power went out momentarily. So if some of these questions have already been asked, just let me know. When it comes to the 5% reduction that you're asking for, Mr. Casey, when did you imagine that starting?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez. This is a fiscal year 21 plan, so it would begin July 1st. We are certainly taking measures right now to save money for the remainder of this fiscal year as well. But what you were looking at is a budget proposal for fiscal year 21 that will run from July 1st to June 30th of 2022.
Got it. And when it comes to the travel budget, is that only to mayor and council, or is that to other city staff as well? Can't hear you.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez, excuse me. We are also removing that part of our budget in the city administrator's office. I can't speak for all the other departments, but I'm going to assume that a number of departments have identified that portion of their budget as well, because there are fewer events and conferences happening. All of the ones that were coming up in the spring and summer, they were canceled. So those funds don't really seem appropriate at this point. So I'm sure other departments are going to be mentioning that as well.
And do they all have the same amount? I believe ours was $5,000 a year. Is that correct?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez, each department has a different way of allocating that funding. So there isn't a general rule across the board, across the organization. In the mayor and council's office, each council member has discretionary funding of about $2,400 for work-related conferences and meetings, and also, as Councilmember Sneddon had mentioned, for interns, for hourly interns. And Madam Mayor has a budget of approximately $5,500 or so for meetings and travel. So it's very different. And then in the city administrator's office, It varies by person, so it's just more of a larger amount, the amount that was identified.
Yeah, if I could just chime in, Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, I think you'll see most departments eliminating a good portion of their meeting and travel. There are some departments that have required training for people to maintain their certifications or specialties. And so that is necessary for them to maintain their professional credentials for the services they provide. So it's hard to kind of give you a blanket statement that no one's going to do any professional development. I think where it's optional in nature, this is not the year for it.
May I,
Mr.
Paul?
Golan, go ahead.
Yes,
Mr.
thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Gutierrez. We're one of those departments like the professional engineers that has a state licensing requirement that requires continuing education. I can say this though, we're certainly not going to be traveling to any vacation spots or out of state. Travel only if needed to get the continuing education units. Thank you.
I can imagine
Go
that
ahead.
some trainings are going to be online. So if you can take that into consideration, if that's an option, is it possible to that travel funding that we are giving up, is it possible to use that for a specific project or a position to fund, or is it just going to go back to the general fund?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, council members, it's all the same general fund money at the end of the day. We need to come up with $9.7 million of general fund savings. And so you will see each department coming up with their recommendations about how to contribute that. The mayor and council travel is not a huge number, as we mentioned. So it's not like we are going to balance the budget on the back of looking at the mayor and council travel budget, but we just kind of felt that that really is the only discretionary option within your office, but we're happy to take guidance and direction on how to deal with that issue.
No, I'm not saying, I'm just trying to find other avenues for us to fund other projects in the city. I'm not upset about giving that up at all.
Yeah. No, I didn't mean that. I apologize. So we need to get to $9.7 million, and whatever savings we get out of that is going towards that bottom line. So it is saving programs because we're not having to go a little bit farther in some other program to offset that balance. So you are contributing to that, but it's hard for me just to say you are saving that specific program. I think that's just your job as an overall vision about how you put the budget together, about what your priorities are, about what you want to keep and what we're going to have to reduce.
Okay. And when it comes to that 9 million, that's a projection that you're coming up with right now, right? That's not what is actually missing from our general fund.
Good question. Madam Mayor, Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, that is our projection of revenues for next fiscal year. And so that's what's challenging. This is what we think revenues will do from July 1, 2020 to June 30th, 2021. So it's our best estimate at this point, looking at trends, talking to consultants and professionals in the field and in the different areas, and making our best professional estimate. And I will continue over and over to say that we will monitor this weekly, daily, monthly, and make adjustments through the fiscal year, because there's just so many unknowns about how the economy bounces back. But correct, the 9.7 is, from the revenue standpoint, our best estimates as of today of what we think next year will be like.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Nedden.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just really quickly, looking at the performance measures, I was just noticing that the staff hours spent responding to Public Records Act requests, it went from 150 hours to 595 hours, and then 1,200 hours. If you could, and that's for fiscal year 2021.
What page are you on there?
I'm on page D11. And it just stands out to me that that's a considerable expense. And is that just what we're projecting based on trends in public record?
It looks like Mr. Kalan has a response, or, okay.
Or, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon, this is Sarah Gorman. I think I can speak to that a little bit. It is both a factor of we've been receiving greater and more complicated Public Records Act requests as the years have gone on, and we've also done much more tracking. So we now have staffers track within their timesheets the time that they're working on Public Records Act requests. So first it was just small tracking, and then more in our office, and then broader across the organization.
Okay, and I understand it's, I mean, we have to do that. Is that like a $20,000 projected increase, or it's hard to tell? It's like number of staff hours, but do you have a ballpark of what that?
It may also depend on the level of staff that's working on it, whether it's an administrative specialist staff that's spending 5 hours on a project, or the city attorney.
So it could be more than 20,000.
It could just vary, depending on the staffer and the amount of time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this section that we just covered? What is the next section? The city clerk's office. Ms. Clerk, are you ready? Ms. Gorman, thanks.
Yes, Madam Mayor and Council, I'll be making the presentation for the city clerk's office, newly part of the city administrator's office, which is just terrific. I'll speak briefly about some of our activities. That's not everything that we do, but a lot of it here. As you know, we edit and we finalize agendas, packets, minutes, and contracts for council meetings. In the past fiscal year, over 500 agenda reports were finalized, and of course, those agenda packets were published and minutes created for all of those meetings. We also act as the filing official for the statements of economic interest, those Form 700 economic disclosure documents, and those are plentiful within the city, with elected officials, appointed officials, and many staffers. So we make sure folks file on an annual basis, and also when they, if they are new to the city or new to a position, file then, and we track them down after we leave the city also. Next page. We also, as Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon just mentioned, work on those Public Records Act requests. They are numerous. We review them, we route them to make sure that they get to the right department, and we produce responses to those requests. Over 800 staff hours spent responding to the request within our office. One of our deputy city clerks spends 50% or more of his time working on those on an ongoing basis. We additionally handle the recruitments and the appointments for the city's advisory groups. The city is based on a heavy advisory group structure. Some cities have 3 or 4, we have a lot more. So we process those applications, they come in, make sure that people are qualified for particular seats, and we present those applications to council, go through the interview process, and then get the appointments. Next page. Going through our organizational chart, we are a very tight and lean organization. I am the city clerk services manager. There are 2 deputy city clerks and 1 half-time records technician. Next page. In terms of our appropriations, as is true citywide, the large majority of our costs are salaries and benefits at 76%, 14% allocated costs. Look like there's a difference between 13, 14, but that's where we are. And supplies and services are really small, right around 9%. So when we look to cut our from our budget, if we're looking at supplies and services, that's going to be a large chunk of the budget. All right, next slide. Some of our performance objectives coming up: to develop and implement a comprehensive electronic records management plan. As you can imagine, records have moved online and to PDFs over the past several years, and our records management is currently set up as if documents were mostly paper. So looking at ways to make sure that departments are managing their documents, destroying them as they should be, saving them where they should be, as most documents are currently electronic. And additionally, with those large number of advisory groups and large number of applicants, researching and working toward implementation of technology to make that application and administration process more efficient, more user-friendly, and more transparent. Next slide. And we also looked at those budget reduction measures of 5%. So we're looking at our supplies and services budget, a couple of items that get us to that number. The first is eliminating the electronic filing of our FPPC campaign finance documents. We have a contract with an outside vendor named NetFile, and we use NetFile for a couple of purposes, but one of them is the electronic filing of those Form 460s, for example, the documents that candidates and ballot measure committees and major donors use to show their expenditures and their contributions. Were we to eliminate using this software, those filings would still be made, they just would be made in paper, not electronically. We would also be looking to eliminate those training, travel, and dues memberships and license budgets, similar to the city administrator's office as a whole. Next, we would be looking to eliminate our contracted municipal code codification services. When the council passes an ordinance, it often becomes part of the municipal code, and we contract with an outside vendor to make sure that that ordinance is incorporated appropriately into the code. It gets the right number. They run a website for us so that people can search for the information, etc. So we would be bringing that work in-house again. That would be done within the city clerk's office. And the final budget reduction member would be moving toward electronic signatures on contracts, implementing a software system called Seamless Docs, which would allow these electronic signatures in a way that's similar to DocuSign. And that would reduce a significant amount of postage and duplicating that our office does on the paper signatures. And additionally, we would reduce our office supplies. Next page. And looking at the impacts of those reductions. For the electronic filing of campaign finance documents, it would take a little longer for the public to view campaign finance documents. We would provide paper copies upon request, unredacted, but that's a step that folks would have to go to. It would also take increased administrative staff time to process those documents. And additionally, increased time and effort for the candidates. If they use the software, it's kind of similar to TurboTax in that it will pull over, say, your entries from the last campaign finance report from the last quarter, they'll pull it over to the next quarter. So if the campaigns are not using that software, they'll have to do that work manually. Looking at the elimination of the travel, training, and certification. A lot of the clerks' training in particular is related to election laws and transparency laws, changes in the Brown Act, changes in the Public Records Act, changes in the Elections Code. So if there is elimination of those trainings, there's always a risk of not being aware of the changes to the law. They do change rapidly, particularly the election laws nowadays. And as Ms. Johnson said, some trainings may go virtual, and any of those that the clerk's office can do, we absolutely will. Have not heard anything yet about the upcoming. There's a big training in December on new laws, but we'll see. But we'll certainly jump on any virtual training that we can. And looking at the service level impacts of the municipal code codification, it would take longer for the public and staff to see the changes to the municipal code. It's a time-consuming process to go through and make sure that the incorporation is done correctly and all the other sections are moved around appropriately. We want to make sure it's right. So it's just going to take longer for those ordinances to be incorporated to the code. Additionally, just because it's going to take longer to perform this task, other internal staff service is going to take longer too, unfortunately. So this would mean reduction in service to departments, including elimination of research that we do for departments, including going out to offsite storage locations or doing extensive research requests. It also means we would not have the staff capacity to work on that electronic document retention process, which could create some legal risks if documents are being kept that shouldn't, or vice versa, and also keeping some high paper storage costs. And that's the end of my presentation. I'm available for any questions.
Questions for Ms. Gorman? Go ahead, Mr. Freedman.
Thank you, Ms. Gorman. So I did have a question on slide 41 regarding the service level reductions. If you were to, the first three, which are eliminate FPP, in particular FPP filing, electronic filing, it seems to me though that if you still have to perform those functions, so if you're not doing it electronically, you're going to have to be more staff intensive, you're going to have paper, that you would actually have costs that would actually be, I don't know if it is, maybe you can shed some light on it, that might eat into that 10,000 savings, the three and those others, or there could even be more. Do you have any indication on if we were to go with those, if the actual costs that are shifted over would be basically net neutral or even higher?
It definitely would take more staff time, as you said, Councilmember Freedman. It's a $10,000 a year contract, so we can look at some numbers and see what that would come out to. But all of these contracts were sort of contracted out to relieve staff pressure. So if there's more staff time, then that will eat into the savings.
Okay, yeah, I'd just like to understand that when you come back, what the actual
Absolutely.
savings, because it's not going to be that full 10,000 or 3,800 or 13. And I think especially if you're going to paper and having to print it out, those are costs too. So I think it's very minimal actually with those savings. And it's, that's my questions for right now. And I think that's the only one I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ms. Gorman. I don't see any other lights, so to speak. So we'll move on to the next. Are we doing human resources next? Information technology. Thank you. Oh, Ms. Snedden.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have a question about process and how we're doing this. So if we're asking questions, but is there a time when we say for like that department what our recommendation is, or is that at the very, very end? For instance, I don't think the city clerk's office should cut their budget at all. I don't know at what point we discuss that. Is that now or is that later?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Councilwoman Snedden. I would like that feedback now. We're gonna have to come back in early June and put a package together. And if I need to find those savings and ask another department to go further, to make further cuts to offset that, then I need to start knowing that so I can approach some of the other general fund departments to make deeper cuts. So if it's something substantive like that, it would be helpful to do now rather than us having to figure that out in early June.
I suppose I have a
Ms. Snedden, so let me say, when he says now, I think he means today. So let's get through the different segments. We'll take public comment, and then we would have deliberative comments, and that would be the time for you to say, I don't want this cut or that cut, and we'll take notes. Is that good?
Yes, so that's on all of our presentations today. We're just asking questions as we've been doing, and then public comment will be on all of them, and
Right.
then we deliberate. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gutierrez, did you have something at this juncture?
You just answered my question. So I'll wait. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we will go to information technology, and looking forward to this presentation, Ms. Knight. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and City Council members. My name is Marianne Knight, and I am the Information Technology Manager. and I will be presenting the IT fiscal year 21 budget for you today. Joining me on this call are Application Supervisor Bill Lupo, Infrastructure Supervisor Rudy Fiddler, and Matt Four from the City Administrator's Office. Next slide, please. So, sorry, up with my notes here. So we'll start our presentation with an overview of the IT department, and then we're going to move into the budget as proposed. So the budget that's actually in the binder that you've all received. We'll discuss the impacts of the coronavirus and then close out with some of our recent accomplishments. Next slide, please. So we'll start with our department overview. We are, first and foremost, a service organization. Every one of our 7 teams performs a mixture of direct customer service, operational support, and project work. Our help desk and our computer training programs are the front lines of our customer support. The help desk provides technical support to city staff, and the training program provides hands-on training. For many employees, these are the only staff in IT with whom they interact. We have 3.5 staff on the help desk and 1 person manning the computer training program. The 4 teams that you see in the center of our arc, the network infrastructure team, enterprise applications, geographic information systems, and web services, these teams are the technical experts in the various systems that we support. They handle issues that are escalated from our help desk, so support issues, and they also handle a full load of operational and project work. And at the very center of our little circle is our department management team. It consists of myself, our infrastructure supervisor who oversees the help desk and the network infrastructure team, and an application supervisor who oversees the remaining 4 teams. Now, the following slides that I have for you, they show some of our operational highlights, recent projects for each team, as well as some of the work that they have performed to support the city during this current pandemic. So I've included a lot of detail on these slides. They are some highlights. They are not everything that each team does. And I've included them there so that you can see them in your packet. But what I'd like to do, I want you to get an idea of what we do, but for the presentation, I'm going to focus on what each team has done for the, in response to the COVID pandemic. So please feel free to ask any questions, but that's the section I want to focus on, is what they have done to support the teams, to support the city during this crisis. For our help desk, they have handled a large increase in remote workers. The number of remote workers ballooned overnight for us. We had to set up accounts. The technicians had to also help a lot of these people who had never worked from home before get used to that new setup. Next slide, please. Our network team, I can't say enough about just the amazing amount of work that this team did to troubleshoot some of the problems that our staff had working remotely. Most of these issues were outside of our organization, things that we really had no control over, but our team has done a really great job of working with support vendors, with our hardware vendors to identify and resolve some of these issues. Next slide, please. Our applications team has handled a lot of different things in relation to the emergency. The one that we are most proud of is the Excella Citizen Access Portal. This allows people to apply for land use permits and submit their plans and pay for their permits online. This is a project that we were very happy to push forward as quickly as possible. Next slide. Our GIS team, they are involved in every natural disaster in the city, whether it's a fire or a flood. We haven't done any work related to the COVID project, but I did want to call them out for the extensive work that they have done in the past related to these natural disasters. They've supported the county EOC as well as the city EOC in those functions. Our web services team, they are working with all different departments to try and identify new solutions to provide services to the public, services that were normally provided in person. Also internal services such as our human resources department. A lot of their onboarding is or has been conducted in person. So we need to find solutions to do that in this new model of social distancing and remote work. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things that we did to support our users is to contract with a vendor, with LogMeIn, to provide these webinar services and remote meeting services. That was something we were able to get up and running pretty quickly, so we're pretty proud of that. And as part of getting any new system up, we always do some training. So our computer trainer offered classes. He did webinars on how to use the new webinar system and how to use the teleconferencing tools in general. So that's a quick overview of what my team does. We are a small team doing lots of different things, very leanly staffed. If you have any questions about any of these slides or before I move on, or any of the tasks that my staff does, I'd be happy to answer them. And it looks like that is not the case, so I will go ahead and move on. What I'm going to do is spend a few minutes going over our fiscal year 2021 budget as proposed. So I won't linger on these, excuse me, too long. The first thing I'd like to do is cover our appropriations for FY21. This pie chart shows the distribution of appropriations for us by type of expenditure. And like most departments, our salary and benefits are the largest portion of our pie. What I've also done though in this slide is I've broken out our supplies and services into two entries. I have, and the reason I did that is to highlight the portion of those that are not discretionary. So if you combine them two, it looks like we have a lot in supplies and services, but 18% of those are the licensing costs, subscription fees, maintenance and support contracts, and other operating costs that are required to maintain the hardware and applications that we currently use. So these are sort of like salary and benefits, but they're for the hardware and the applications rather than for humans. So we really can't cut into those, even though it may look like a big chunk of our budget. It's non-discretionary. The discretionary spending in our budget does fall into those other supplies and services, which comprise 6%, and the 1% in the non-capital or special projects areas. Our allocated costs, again, are set by finance. And then lastly, I'd like to talk about this 7% of the pie, which goes to a transfer to capital. I'm going to talk about that in more detail when I talk about our department revenue. But because of that transfer to revenue, I've included two different totals on this slide. The total of the pie is $4.15 million. But when you take out that transfer to capital, you really see our total operating expenditures are $3.88 million. And that will match the figures that you see on page B15. Next slide, please. So if we look at the amounts behind these expenditures, salary and benefits, we do see an increase in salary and benefits. This is primarily related to a new position that we have requested to support the Excella land use system. This is a very large and complex system. And like all of our other large and complex enterprise systems, it does really require staff to support it. So you will hear more about this position when you hear from community development. On July 2nd, they are helping to fund the position for fiscal year 21. We are projecting some minor savings in maintenance and support contracts. We were planning to increase our expenditures in supplies and services, and we had some minor adjustments in both allocated costs and the non-capital and special project areas, which took us to our total expenditures of $3.88 million. When we add in the transfer to capital, we add that back in, that takes us to a total expenditure of $4.15 million. Next slide, please. So our revenue comes from a variety of sources, and in fiscal year 21, we see 4 different sources of revenue. As an intra-city service fund, our largest source of revenue comes from department allocations. These fund our entire operating budget, as well as a portion of our ongoing capital projects. We fund capital projects such as our website upgrade out of the general fund's capital improvement plan. And we receive transfers from individual departments to fund their specific technology needs. In fiscal year 21, we are receiving funding from the water, wastewater, and solid waste funds in order to upgrade our utility billing system. That takes us to our grand total of revenue of $4.88 million, which is what you see on page B9. The next thing we need to factor in for revenue is that transfer to capital, that 7% in our appropriations pie for our operating budget. This transfer funds our desktop replacement program and our infrastructure replacement program. Those are two critical ongoing replacement projects that maintain our systems. These are all of the, this includes all of the hardware that we have here on premise in our 2 data centers, as well as all the workstations and computers that staff use in the department. 110,000 of that comes from department allocations. We always know that we're getting that 110,000 when we do the 2-year budget cycle, so we include it for the 2nd year of the cycle. But the other portion of that funding comes from excess reserves in the operating fund. So if IT has any savings, if we have vacant positions, anything that results in us spending less than we anticipated, that accumulates in our operating fund reserves. And when finance closes the year for us, they tell us how much that excess is, if there is any. And then we transfer that into the capital program the following year. So that is what is funding these 2 programs, is any savings and then the 110,000 that we get from the department. So when you add in that transfer to capital, that takes us to our total of 5.15 million, which is not what you see on page B9, because in B9 they're looking at not so much that transfer to capital, but they're looking at how much we're taking out of reserves, which is slightly less. Next slide, please. In our capital program for FY21, we have 4 projects funded. We have 2 projects that are funded every year. I just mentioned our network infrastructure replacement program and our workstation replacement program. So those are the amounts that we have funded for FY21. The website upgrade is scheduled. This is a complete replacement of the system we're using now. This is a necessary project, so we do plan to go ahead with it. And then lastly, the upgrade, a major upgrade to our utility billing system. That takes us to our grand total in our capital program of 1.24 million. Next slide, please. So that summarizes our budget as recommended. And before I move on, I'd like to pause to see if there are any questions. And if not, then let's talk about.
Just to see if there's any questions.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Madam Mayor. So that summarizes that budget. So I'd like to talk next. Oh.
Ms. Knight, it looks like Ms. Snedden has a question.
Sorry, sometimes I fumble to turn the camera on. For those department allocations, how does that affect you if each department is decreasing their budget 5%? Would that allocation decrease 5% and then you'd be decreasing 5% on top of that? Or does that remain to be seen, just how that fits in?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Snedden. I believe that remains to be seen. The allocated cost, if there's a reduction to them, I believe would come from finance. But they do typically adjust those values throughout the budget cycle. So departments, use what we have now, and then we may see adjustments made to them over the course of the budget cycle. But as of this point, I have not been told that my total revenue amount has been cut.
Thank you.
Councilmember Harmon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Knight. I just have a couple of quick points of clarification. Thank you so much. On the Acela program, you mentioned that there's going to be a new position that's half funded by community development or funded in some way. Is that in addition to the consultant that I think we funded some months back? Or is that separate from that?
Yes, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Harmon, that is actually separate. It is in addition to that funding. We have spent a good portion of those funds, yet we have not fully expended them. I would anticipate we may still continue to want to have some consulting services just so we can have that expert help, but we will have to see really who we hire for the position and what their total skill level is.
Okay, I would be interested moving forward in some information about just how much total we're spending currently and on an ongoing basis on this program.
Yeah, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Harmon, I'll make sure community development covers that more thoroughly in their presentation. My understanding is that we were going to try to phase out the consultant use and have the in-house expertise on the go forward basis. But thanks for the heads up, and we'll make sure we cover that when they come forward.
Thank you so much.
Just to add to that, I would like to state that whatever funds are left in the contract would still be carried forward and remain available to us. So rather than adding more funding to it. So I was not clear on that. Rather than necessarily increasing the funding, we would just continue whatever funds are remaining.
Okay, I think I understood that. Thank you. My interest certainly is not in being duplicative in our payments on this. So I appreciate that. Look forward to that info. And my other question with regard to the structure of this department, I know maybe this is for Mr. Casey, actually. You mentioned that we are creating a department head position, but not filling it. That was very clear. But I'm wondering in terms of how this budget is laid out, is there going to be a line item for that position within this budget, and then it's just empty? Because what I'm trying to get at here is what I'm interested in knowing more about is the long-term unfunded liability implications of these new positions, what the retirement implications, and just so that I can kind of put all the pieces together. And I totally recognizing that that's not going to be filled right now. I hear you and thank you for clarifying that. I'm just wondering if we can get some sense of what we might be looking at 5 years from now or whenever you do fill that, if we approve that today, just what that looks like. So maybe that's for the future.
No, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Harmon, good question. And it's something we're kind of struggling with about how do you budget, what do you put in, what do you don't. So my mindset is to create the organizational structure and see if we're in a fiscal situation come next year to be able to move and kind of implement on it. And if not, then we might need to revisit the organizational structure and go back to a different framework. So it's kind of a placeholder for now to see, and then I'll have to come back to you all and explain the fiscal situation if we're able to implement it or if we have to go a different direction. There's just so much uncertainty right now. I don't want to give up the dream because I do like the framework we're laying out, but if we can't afford it, we can't afford it, and we'll have to look at a different way to bring it forward.
Great. So I'm hearing from you there either way will be more conversation about any new position. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Carry on, Ms. Knight. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please, Matt. So reductions that we're looking at we've actually implemented some of these already in FY20, and these are changes that we're looking at in FY21. The values you see listed on the slide are the FY21 projected savings. The first thing we're looking at are some new services, some new operating expenses that we were adding into the budget, including actually in FY20. We were looking to add some consulting and professional services. One of those is to take advantage of a new statewide contract with Gartner for analysis services. We had budgeted for this in both years. It accounts for about $48,000 of that portion. And what that contract would do is it would give us access to thousands of industry experts and all the guidance they can provide us at a fraction of the cost that it would be to us to, say, bring on consultants to assist with individual IT projects. So we put that on hold for now. And the other contract, this is something we had budgeted for fiscal year 21, was to add a security contract to enhance the monitoring of our network traffic, something called a Security Operations Center as a Service. They would provide 24-hour monitoring of our network traffic. Right now, we have a very robust cybersecurity program. We have our network team handles all of our cybersecurity. They get alerts throughout the night if issues arise. If something's down, this team already knows about it before I reach out to them to tell them it is. So we have a very robust program now. This is a new service to enhance that. So we will be putting that on hold for now. In regular operating expenses, like everyone else, we've put all of our travel and training funds on hold, all of our remaining funds for fiscal year 20, and everything for fiscal year 21 at the moment. are on hold, as well as software under $25,000. We have put one particular item, we budget $20,000 each year to purchase additional imagery sets for our GIS system. So we will continue with our current set. We will not be updating that this year or next. We'll be putting that on hold. As far as the training, just like everyone else, we will be limited to whatever training we can obtain remotely. A lot of our training does come from user conferences or training from Microsoft and other vendors to ensure that we're up to date on the latest technology. So we will look for alternate methods to obtain that in order to stay up to date. And then the last item that we've identified is $124,000 in our capital budget. We have a project that was funded several years ago to perform facility upgrades at our data center at Fire Station 1. City has 2 data centers. We have the one here at City Hall and the one at Fire Station 1. Several years ago, we had some excess reserves and we wanted to use that to make some facility upgrades. So these are not upgrades to the equipment, the IT equipment. These are things like the HVAC system and the electrical system at the data center. The data center is operating fine. Both of our data centers are operating fine. We were planning to make the center at the fire station our primary data center. Right now, that's at City Hall. We were looking to do that because it's the higher seismic rating for that building. But we can continue operating as we are right now at City Hall and with the fire department as our backup data center without any issues at all. So do you have any questions? Are there any questions about any of these proposed reductions that I've outlined? Looks like there aren't, so thank you. What I'd like to do is close out on a high note. I'm not going to go through all of our our performance measures for FY21 or FY20, but I would like to focus on some of the highlights that we've achieved this past year. For FY20, it has been a very busy year for us so far. This emergency has really hit my teams hard in terms of their workload. We've completed over 8,600 service requests and incidents so far this year, which is rather high for us. Our staff installed new public computers at both the East Side and the main library earlier in the year before the crisis hit, obviously. And we brought the Excella Citizen Access Portal online. So that was a big, huge accomplishment for us. In FY20, what we really want to focus on, given the current circumstances, is we want to focus on our core mission, which is maintaining the systems that we have and supporting the users that we have. So that concludes my presentation. And I am here along with Bill Lupo and Rudy Fiddler to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. I'll ask for questions from the City Council. With gratitude for all the work that you've done responding to us needing to use more technology. Really, really grateful for that. Mr. Gutierrez, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When it comes to the Excella project, pre-COVID situation, when were you planning to implement that software?
I'm going to have Bill Lupo, our application supervisor, answer that question. He is the one who he and his staff have been leading that project.
Good morning, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez. My name's Bill Lupo. I'm the technology supervisor and project manager for Excella. If I could ask you to explain your question a little bit more, because Excella went online March 4th, a couple of years ago. We just specifically implemented the ACA payment portal on April 16th of this year.
Okay, I was just wondering because it seemed like it wasn't fully launched or implemented up until recently. And I can't remember the last time I got an update of it as to when you were projecting its implementation.
Yeah, thanks, Councilmember Gutierrez. The final phase of implementing ACA that we call it is the Citizen Access Portal, was always scheduled to follow the Acela automation piece, which is the back office component. And that was waiting for some final contract work with the credit card vendor, which all came together in a very short period of time. And so we were able to bring that online, again, as I mentioned, on April 16th of this year. So does that cover?
So the current situation didn't expedite the entire project or implementation of the software?
Actually, yes, it did. So there was, since the public counter closed and other physical access to 630 Garden, there was an immediate need to expedite the payment portal and the public portion of Acela. So that project became our primary effort. And yes, in fact, it did force us to put other stuff on hold and bring that online immediately.
Okay. And
I think
how's it working?
No.
How's it working so far?
Oh, I think, yeah, I think it's working great. It's a significant effort. And as I mentioned, the first actual payment went through April 16th. And overall, we're very happy to get that available and online so it serves the public needs.
And it's already been sent out to the general public as to how to use it and fill it out.
Councilmember Gutierrez, I'm not sure to what extent we have done public outreach. That is something we would be doing with the Community Development Department. You know, I would like to just add on to what Mr. Lupo has said, is that, you know, there were some contingencies with this project that were, you know, you were asking like, what was our target date for bringing this live? And we've been hoping to bring it live for quite some time. But there were some delays that were beyond our control and beyond the city's control. And one of those things did come together for us shortly the start of this emergency. And then Bill and his team they were able to just focus on it and get all the remaining work that was on our plate to be done to get that accomplished. So we couldn't come up with an actual target go live date because we had that unknown with this vendor as to when we would get that payment adapter ready. But we've been trying to get it up and running for over a year at this point.
Okay.
And Councilmember Gutierrez, this is Matt. The only thing I would add is we saw the COVID disaster develop. That really galvanized, as Ms. Knight said, the implementation of this. Mr. Buell, the community development director, and the entire land development team did a really concerted, very concentrated effort to get training to users and provide a lot of support. So from day one, they were able to use this in all of its current capacity.
Okay. So if it wasn't for this emergency, you think it would have taken longer for it to launch?
It's hard to say, but there's potential for that. It's hard to say, honestly. The fact that there was the urgency to it for community development, they had no other way to take in plans. So when IT works on a project, we do need to work with the business owners for whom that system is going to be used. So nobody wants us putting in a land use system without the people who manage land use, making sure we're doing it correctly. So Bill and his staff can work, you know, on a project, but we do need to make sure we're doing it correctly. And to Matt's point, the staff in community development needed to focus on this, just as our team dedicated as many resources as we could. They were not the holdup, though. I just want to emphasize the real holdup for us was working with the payment adapter to get the credit card payments online. And so once that happened, I don't know how long it would have taken beyond that under normal operating procedures to be able to complete all the rest of the work to get it up and running.
And if I could add, I don't think this was a matter of delays. As Mr. Lupo said, this was live a couple years ago. It was live. This final piece of the fully functioning, outward facing customers never need to come to a building piece. That was the final peg. I think that it's the COVID disaster that really, once that whole dynamic changed with social distancing and with all that, with all those restrictions, the entire city was solely focused on making that happen to support the governor's order. And that's what coalesced and really pushed us across this final, and I'll say it again, the final little bit of remaining work that really was critical under these circumstances, though.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. We have human resources to do, sustainability and resilience department, public comment, and then the discussion that we're going to have. It's 3, and then we're supposed to end at 4. So we are going to human resources next, and Ms. Clerk. Not Ms. Clerk. We're ready for the next staff presentation. Mr. Casey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Wendy Levy should be coming on board. She is our Human Resources Manager. Graciela, are you going to be presenting? Never mind. Graciela. Co-presenting, there they are. So just again to frame, this is Human Resources. It's been a division in the Administrative Services Department. With the elimination of the department, our recommendation is to elevate the division to a department status, but with no change in positions, but a reclassification of Ms. Levy to Human Resources Director. She's doing an outstanding job for the city. And so I'm excited to move forward with that opportunity with your all's approval, but we'll let them present their budget for you today.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members. I am Wendy Levy, currently the HR manager. I'm joined by Graciela Reynoso, who is our senior human resources analyst. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to present the Human Resources Department budget today. Next slide. So just to focus a little bit on this slide, excellence through people, I draw your attention to this as I think about my staff and the people I'm honored to work with in this city. You know, I work on a very dedicated, creative, hardworking team that cares for the employees. And I hope this presentation will speak to the value that human resources adds in light of the current environment. Next slide. So who we are. We are responsible for providing excellent and innovative customer service to our future and existing employees in the areas of talent acquisition, workforce planning and development, employee relations, compensation and classification, and benefits and wellness. We're the hub, the first entree into the city, and we remain a partner with each employee throughout the employee's entire work life cycle. Next slide, please. This is just an overview of the department. We do have 10 positions, and we are segregated into different areas. As you can see, we have a lot of services and programs that we provide in benefits, employee services, and support. And I will just go through a little bit of each of those areas. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit about what we do. So as far as our benefits section, I like to define each of our services in 3 little words. So for benefits, we sustain, we nourish, and we protect. And our mission for benefits is to provide comprehensive benefit services and programs to all our eligible employees, retirees, dependents, and these benefits not only meet the needs, but assure the city maximizes cost effectiveness and assures optimal health and productivity of each of our employees. We do this through our programs of benefits administration, retirement administration, wellness programs, deferred compensation, leave administration, and employee assistance programs. As far as employee services, we discover, acquire, and keep, and that is comprised of our talent acquisition, selection of the most qualified candidates, as well as providing the tools, resources, and opportunities for growth to retain our quality workforce. And we do that through our programs of compensation, classification, recruitment, training, MOU policy and procedure administration, employee relations, and performance management. And finally, inclusion, structure, and access, which are our support programs. These programs are Civil Service Commission, Benefits Committee, the Spanish Language Cadre. All of these programs engage staff and the community and provide venues for collaboration and communication. Next slide, please. So these are some of our statistics. These are, as far as benefits, our leave requests, and you can see how we've done over the past few years. Fiscal year 20 is showing a little bit lower, only because we're not quite over fiscal year 20. Leave requests are an important part of our HR services. Not only do we administer these programs, but we follow through and checking in with employees and making sure that employee has what they need during these critical times in their lives. So we assist through the entire process and make sure that communication channel is open. Next slide.
And further program highlights will be covered by me. My name is Graciela Reynoso, as Wendy stated earlier, and I'm the Senior Human Resources Analyst, so I will be co-presenting a little bit with Wendy. Other metrics that we look at are on this slide here, which have are really the crux of what any HR department is involved with, such as recruitments conducted. You can see that we're pretty consistent, conducting over 100 recruitments for the last three or four fiscal years. Applications received, we do review over 6,000 applications a year. Every application gets looked at and scored and reviewed in some manner. So we are very diligent in our recruitment processes. And that yields us about 100 employees per year that we're onboarding. This current fiscal year, we are at 80. And so that is a process by where we've advertised the job, we've discovered some great candidates and gone through the full process of the recruitment cycle. We do hire roughly 400 hourly employees in a normal year. This year, we did stop the process because of the COVID-19 crisis, and we were at 212 employees that we hired through the end of March. Their next item down is the classification studies. So as Wendy mentioned, human resources plays a large role in obviously staffing and workforce studies within the city. Every year, right around December, we begin receiving requests from departments to reclassify positions that the departments will either maybe a new position that they're interested in having, or it may be a position that they feel has kind of changed in scope based on just the natural ebb and flow of what natural work life is. So skills may be different, duties may need to differ. And that's what we call reclassification studies. And every year we conduct, around 30 or more. For FY 2020, we did have 52 submittals. So these are studies that the HR analysts conduct, includes interviewing folks and really assessing the job versus the class spec to make sure that we are properly calibrated in that respect. Next slide, please. I wanted to share with you some turnover statistics, which we've gathered here. You'll see that the city does run pretty consistently under 10% for turnover, which is a really good rate. Currently for FY 2020, as of March, we were at 7.24%. And please keep in mind that this does include retirements as well. So the number of employees that we are retaining because they find the employment relationship beneficial, they enjoy working for the city. It's a great organization. Our turnover rate is pretty low when you take into consideration natural retirements that occur. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. Wendy, is this your slide?
Oh, did you, so can we go back a slide, please?
Thank you. I apologize, it looked like the other slide. So one of the programs that we're going to be discussing today is training. And in the current environment that we're in, and generally throughout the year, we do find that training is very beneficial to employees. So we did want to highlight the fact that the city does conduct a very large number of training throughout the year. And you can see here that consistently we have come in at about 100 classes per fiscal year. So the way that we procure training is either our HR staff ourselves, we will conduct the training, which provides for a really customized look at city processes, compliance issues, and how we really should be doing HR related items at the city. We also partner with a number of organizations, one of them being City College's Career Skills Institute, which offers a significant number of classes to the city, and they do that at no charge. So that's something that's significant to point out because it is a very beneficial partnership, and our employees have found it very valuable. So overall, the hours of training that you see outlined here are the hours that are offered to employees throughout the fiscal year, either through talent that we bring in, consultants, or the Career Skills Institute, or our HR staff. Okay. Next slide.
Thank you. So the HR budget, our appropriations are from the general fund. And as you can see, a significant portion of our budget are salaries and benefits. And that reflects an important fact that staff is a true resource. The majority of our budget, as I said, is in salaries. And true to our name, we are nothing if not resourceful. Next slide, please. So for fiscal year 2021, our budget is status quo. The change that you see in the recommended adjustments of $17,789 is due to a reclassification for fiscal year 21. Supplies and services is staying constant. There is a slight increase of $11,000 in allocated costs, and employee development is also staying status quo. Next slide, please. So we were talking about reductions due to COVID-19 for fiscal year 21. The way we would meet the 5% is we currently have a vacant HR technician, and we would keep that open for a period of 6 months to realize a savings of about $51,000. Essentially, when I put this together, I was thinking about, you know, COVID has brought about all these circumstances, and we really need to focus on the keeps and not the cuts. But to that end, should we need to modify, we would hold that position vacant for that amount of time or longer if needed be. What this means as far as an impact is, you know, our city has a classification system that has not been reviewed since 1991. And so part of my wish list had been to start at least the process of looking at what a citywide classification study would cost, what that would look like. And that of course is going to be postponed. With the vacancy, our employee to HR staff ratio will decrease, and that means all hands are on deck. And that will mean we might have some work challenges. Our quality will stay the same, but the quantity of what we need to get done will increase because our staff numbers are down. And as always, our focus, you know, I try to be proactive, and in this case, what we really need to focus on is regulatory compliance. It's going to be the priority. We really need to maintain looking at legal implications of what we do, MOU implications, and making sure that our processes are legal and defensible. So another cut we are considering to meet that 5% is based on employee development. And so we would have a reduction of about 50% to those budgets. And although it would reduce training capabilities and employee development, we are creative and we are thinking of ways to bring those programs in-house. A number of our training programs are free currently, but we also want to make sure that we do provide some options for growth. And so bringing those services and those training programs in-house would be one way that we could significantly impact or reduce the budget and at least have those programs available. Additionally, we're looking at other cuts in supplies and services. One of the items that we have currently is an RFP out for some pre-employment services. We're looking to reduce our cuts in our budget regarding those services as well. And so that would also contribute to that bottom line reduction. Next slide, please. So on to the stuff that I really get excited about. And these are what we did in 2020 as far as accomplishments. Most of you know or don't know that I've only been with the city for about a year and a half. And I'm honored to be here. But some of the things that we've done as a team, and I really give my team all the credit. As far as engagement, what we've done is we created an HR forum, which is, and it used to be in person, now it's going to be on via webinar. But this is where we bring together staff who touch HR processes and give them information about our whatever new is going on in the environment. When COVID-19 hit, we had an HR forum where we talked about our new processes in place, how we were administrating our leaves. So that is one of the forums that really brings HR to the departments, to those people who touch those processes. We also have a monthly newsletter called the HR Connection, and that brings to the entire employee population those types of topics that are either of interest, changes in process, new things that are going on. So it's another touch point for us to really connect and engage all of our employees. As far as process improvements, we have gone totally online as far as our application process, and that has created a lot of efficiencies for the recruitment process and selection process. We've also brought offer letters into HR as opposed to farming them out to the departments, just to create some consistency in communication and really developing that relationship for the new employee in meeting HR and really being the entree to the city. We also conducted an I-9 audit of all of our existing I-9s. We did 100% of those and we are fully compliant. And then we brought in E-Verify, which is an online format for the verification of I-9 information. So that was an efficiency that we created, both in staff time as well as really tightening up those processes. We have changed our in-processing. We now have that process scheduled And with COVID-19, we've actually brought it online with the help of IT. We put our documents into seamless docs. And so folks we are bringing on can sign their forms online, creating, we do have virtual face-to-face, but at least we are maintaining governor's orders and social distancing. We also created a new FlexWork site and a Spanish language site, because those are two items that really were in the forefront. And so folks can go on those sites and get information about how the Spanish language access plan works. We recently have been using that Spanish language cadre in light of COVID-19 and really needing to translate our documents that are informative and important to our bilingual population. So that has really been in use. And of course, FlexWork with telecommuting and what's going on, it became necessary to really make those documents and the process visible. As far as employee development, this year we implemented and started a new program called the City Supervisory Excellence Academy. And so this is a great 18-month program, or 6-month program, sorry about that, that really brings, when we have new supervisors, sometimes there are gaps in skills. And so really being able to connect with those up and coming supervisors, your current supervisors, and providing that training and exposure to really good practices, best practices, and just giving them familiarity with the city processes and how to really implement them within their own teams. Benefits had an amazing year this year. Not only did we switch to CalPERS Health, we enrolled people by hand. We enrolled about 850 folks into the CalPERS program. So that was a really big undertaking that was quite successful. And we got some really good feedback related to that. And then again, just to talk about our pre-employment physical, we had, in partnership with Risk, we looked at all of our classifications and really determined which of our classifications needed a pre-employment physical, which did not, and created alignment within our classification system. And then with that, we sent out the RFP to see if we could reduce our budget. As far as recognition, not to toot our own horn, but I will do it anyway. We were awarded by ICMA we were awarded the champion of talent and development. So that was really exciting. And we received that based on our CC, or City Supervisory Excellence Academy. So that was really exciting and an honor to receive that recognition. Next slide, please. So what are our goals and initiatives for fiscal year 2021? Of course, we're doing more with less. And with that in mind, as far as employee engagement, we're looking to really hone in on employee engagement. So we'll be sending out some surveys to see what people are really, how do we bring people together? How do we, with what's going on, make sure that employees have a proper sense of their well-being? So really seeing what the needs of our employee population are. So that's going to be one of our focuses. As far as process improvements, we're looking at completing a personnel file transfer. So all of the files that are outside in the departments, we're looking to completing, bringing them in-house to HR and having one central repository for those files. We also, in our trying to get to paperless, we're looking at putting all of our benefit files online as well, using the on-base system. So that will be an easier way to access and also keep up to date those files without the paper getting in the way. We're also looking at all of our HR forms, making sure they're updated, putting them on seamless docs, and making sure they're accessible to all of our employees. And then a big focus on offboarding and the exit process. So we are looking at ways to improve that process, to make sure the lines of communication are always open, and looking for how that information that we get during the offboarding process can really speak to any improvements in the workplace. As far as employee development, we're looking at bringing Spanish language classes on site. We have on our team some folks who are specialize in the Spanish language and are fluent and are willing to teach classes for those in the cadre to perfect their business conversational skills. So that will be forthcoming. And then also one of the things that we're considering is what mentorship is and how we can really implement that throughout the city. And although, you know, it's a lot to take on, I think it's important that we are thinking about succession planning and how we prepare folks for their career. So we're looking at that as well. And as far as benefits, we are implementing a new administrator who will replace our existing benefits administrator with an online portal. This administrator is not only cheaper, but it's very slick in what it provides. And they are one of the only providers who is online with CalPERS or will be online with CalPERS. So we're looking at that. And then as far as our Moss site for benefits, we're looking at creating a one-stop shop. So anyone who has questions regarding benefits can go to one place and find the information they need. And it will simplify and hopefully reduce the questions that come in to our folks. Next slide, please. And that is my presentation, and I open it up for any questions and love to have some questions or answer anything.
Great. I love your goals for the future, your accomplishments, and very proud of our Human Resources Department. And I'll ask my City Council colleagues if they have questions. Ms. Sneddon, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick question. When people don't sign up for health insurance, for the PERS health insurance, where does that funding go that wasn't accepted? I don't know if I'm asking that right. When people decline health coverage, does that go back into a budget somewhere, or where does that go?
For people who do opt out, there are some bargaining units where they will get some cafeteria dollars back. So it really depends on the MOU that people are associated or represented by.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? I think it was such a thorough presentation. Ms. Levy, Ms. Reynoso, thank you so much. We'll keep on keeping on. Thanks. And we'll move on to the next section, sustainability and resilience. Mr. Casey.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. I will lead this off. This is kind of the new, not really funded department that we've been talking about to some extent, but I kind of want to give you the thought process of why we are recommending this from a structural standpoint going forward. And then we'll let the two divisions who are going to populate this to begin with make their presentations. They come from other departments, but they're existing divisions in that regard. So next slide, please. So we'll do a quick department overview, and then we'll talk environmental services and the energy and climate division, and then answer any questions. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what we're trying to be responsive to here is real clear council direction and guidance and vision about wanting to re-energize the city's commitment to sustainability and resilience as a community. And you've done that through a number of goals, through climate action planning, through community choice energy, through an energy master plan, and a number of environmental goals. And so when we were eliminating the administrative services department, we got together as an executive team and said, how can we lead organizationally going forward? And we felt creating and consolidating existing efforts into a sustainability department made a lot of sense. And so we feel in many ways this is responsive to the guidance and direction of you and prior councils about where you want the city to be going. So we think that this is responsive to your goals and also setting kind of a clear ownership and management structure to be responsive to that so that we can hold people accountable for executing on all the desires that you need to do. And we also think we have a greater impact when we're approaching these issues holistically. Next slide, please. So the department structure, what we wanted to do is do a light touch initially. Let's get the department structure in place. Let's start with two divisions, one being the Environmental Services Division, which has been in our finance department. And so environmental services doesn't naturally really want to live in a finance department. It worked because at the time that it was created, negotiation of the Marburg contract was really much in place and the finance director at the time was actively involved. So it made sense in the moment back then. I don't think it makes sense now for environmental services to be in our finance department. I think it wants to live and coordinate and collaborate with other like-minded community-focused entities working on sustainability type efforts. So we want to move the environmental services from finance department to this new department. And then also the energy and climate division, which is becoming more and more active. It started off in our facilities division in public works and had great support there from Jim Dewey to Mike Wilshire and Lilia Parentow being a consistent force there. But as we enter into community choice energy, and doing an energy master plan and some other very aggressive efforts that we've been talking with council and that you have directed us to do and have funded, it takes on a greater importance that it doesn't really, again, naturally want to live in a facilities division within public works. And so we'd want to move that from public works into this new department. So those will be the two initial divisions that will populate this new department. Again, no new positions that come out of this reorganization. There was a desire to have a department head lead that effort, but at this time we will not fill that position. And I will ask Rebecca Bjork to do double duty as public works director and this acting director and oversee both of those. And she would be quite capable of doing that. So I thank her for stepping into that role. Next slide, please. So this is the interesting slide, though, that talks about all the different coordination efforts across different departments that I'd want this department to lead and help facilitate. And over time, I could see some of these other actions gravitating over into this new department once it's established and up and running that makes sense. But you've got a number of community-facing sustainable type efforts going on. We've got the sea level rise study, climate action plan, the energy master plan, solid waste reduction efforts, wildfire protection, transportation planning, creeks and water quality, and water conservation efforts. So it shows that we are doing an awful lot in this field, but it's spread out amongst a lot of departments. And so the organizational concept is to create a department that kind of takes a leadership role and can help coordinate and lead all these companion efforts that are occurring within the city. Next slide, please. But as we mentioned, terrible timing to have the economic impact for establishing this. So we want to start slow, but we do want to start now and build the department because, again, I think this is a decades type organization structure that we need. Sea level rise is going to be an ongoing challenge for us for the next 40, 50 plus years. And it's a priority for council, it's a priority for the city. And so having some leadership to kind of guide that is really important. It's not just a one-year issue. But as I mentioned, we will hold the department head position unfilled. As with the IT director position, we will come back to you at a later date when we feel the financial structure makes sense. If for some reason it doesn't look like the financial structure will ever make sense, then we will have to move back into a different direction. This position would be funded from a number of different funds. It wouldn't just be general fund supported. It would have enterprise funds. It would have the Community Choice Energy Fund help support it. So I have hope that as we come out of this economic crisis and those issues become realities, that it will make sense to populate the director position. But for now, we are not recommending that. Next slide, please. So with that, that's just kind of the philosophy behind the organizational structure. I'd now like to turn it over to the two division managers to talk specifically about the actual components that are populated. And we'll start with Renee Eyerly in Environmental Services.
Good afternoon. Our team is delighted to be an inaugural division in the new department. So thank you, Madam Mayor and Council and Mr. Casey for your leadership. It certainly reframes Santa Barbara as a sustainability leader, and we're very excited to be a part of it. Next, today I'll be going over some program highlights and our budget, in addition to our proposed rate increase, and then talk about some of the budgetary impacts and accomplishments. Next slide. So our division oversees a $30 million operation. Solid waste is an enterprise fund, and we are 100% funded by garbage and recycling rates. It's a combination of contracted services that require oversight and programs and services delivered in-house with a staff of 10. And as you can see, this is how we split out our budget: 4.3 million for in-house program delivery, the remainder for contracts and services. Next slide. We provide a breadth of programs and services for the community as shown in the graphic. Our city team provides all of the program services here listed, except for the solid waste utility. So today I'll be highlighting 3 areas: that utility, clean SB, and waste reduction and diversion. Next slide. So close to 90% of our budget is tied to long-term service contracts for collection, processing, and disposal of garbage, recycling, and organics. We manage these complex agreements, we audit and ensure performance, and we also ensure that there's adequate revenue for the fund. Next slide. Through city staff, we manage other programs, including a suite of community services that we've expanded over the last 3 years due to council leadership and community need. And collectively we refer to them as Clean SB. So this includes illegal dumping and bulky items, encampment cleanups, litter cleanup, public containers, and code enforcement. Next slide. So today I'll focus on 2 Clean SB programs: illegal dumping and encampment cleanups. In early 2017, we instituted more comprehensive education, streamlined operations, and expanded services to address what had been increases in illegal dumping around the city. Through efforts to have residents use the existing bulky item service, public education on how to report illegal dumping, and programs such as regularly weekly collection in hotspot areas, we've seen measured decrease in illegal dumping in the city. So there's no magic bullet to address illegal dumping, but we continue to pilot new services and outreach and learn from initiatives in other communities. Next slide. So also in 2017, ESD took over funding and coordinating encampment cleanups on city streets and Caltrans and UP properties. It's a group effort among police, streets divisions, and state agencies. For comprehensive data collection in the city, we also work with creeks and parks to provide a more complete picture of encampment activity and cleanups. It's allowed us to identify recurring areas of camps and be proactive in monitoring and cleaning sites, along with enabling service providers to visit the camps before a scheduled cleanup. Next slide. So this is a snapshot of the last 2 years. And in fiscal years 18 and 19, we'd reach annual cleanups of 60 to 70 per year, and we're on trend again this year in fiscal year 20. But obviously with the pandemic, they've been temporarily suspended. New this year was establishing bi-weekly litter cleanups and power washings under and around 4 underpasses: Milpas, Cacique, Quarantina, and Calle de Cesar Chavez. Again, it's an ongoing effort, and like illegal dumping, there's no quick or easy solution, but we continue to learn and share ideas amongst ourselves and with other communities. Next slide. Around waste reduction, we're a leader statewide, and we work under an increasing number of state mandates. A highlight of our program is achieving 92% compliance from local businesses with the state's mandatory commercial recycling and organics diversion regulations. And we've done that voluntarily. We've been able to achieve this so far with our stellar community outreach operation staff, and we've not had to enact a local mandatory ordinance, which is strongly encouraged by the state. Also of note, food rescue is becoming an increasingly important component of organics diversion. A new law sets a goal for food that is edible, but would otherwise be thrown away or composted to be redirected to food banks or other nonprofits feeding the food insecure. So it's an important part of local resilience. We're working with the Community Environmental Council, Food Bank, the county, and businesses on new programming, and it's certainly timely given the economic stress the community is feeling. Next slide. So let's talk about our budget. So the next slide, please. This slide shows the anticipated revenues that were needed pre-pandemic. Included in this estimate is an 8% rate increase. We presented to Finance Committee 2 weeks ago to discuss this, and we've modified the rate increase to 7%. I'll discuss this more in a few minutes, but it's also important to note that since March, we've seen a 20% decrease in commercial service revenue. No surprise with the closure of the businesses. So we're continuing to monitor this closely, and we'll continue to model and report back to the Finance Committee and Council as the year progresses. Next slide. Like our revenue, close to 90% of our expenditures are tied to the collection, processing, and disposal, and that's the last, next to last line there. Next slide, please. So regarding our proposed rates, obviously we would prefer to delay rate increases this year if we could, but we do have clear contractual obligations to Marburg and the county. The increases are laid out in their agreements. For collection, an annual increase is tied to CPI, and for processing and disposal, per our agreement with the county, for the last 4 years, we have been stepping up fees to fund the capital and operating costs for the resource center being built at Tehiquas. It will be operational in early 2021. It's the largest capital public works project in county history. It's a state-of-the-art facility, and it will help us achieve up to 85% diversion. We'd also use much of our fund reserves to mitigate the rate increase tied to this project in fiscal year 18, and we don't have funds to otherwise mitigate the rate increase this year, unfortunately. Next slide, please. So here's a breakdown for how the rate increase is calculated. 2.2% based on CPIs for collection, 4.6% for processing and disposal, and then we have a small percentage remaining to the Clean SB program. We'd eliminated, to move from the 8% to the 7% that you see now proposed, we eliminated other services to be provided in-house by staff. So we've postponed those projects. And as example for single family typical residents, a 7% increase translates to about $4 per month. Next slide, please. For comparison rates, this current fiscal year, looking across the South County, you can see that the city of Santa Barbara's rates are in the ballpark of other communities surrounding us. This makes sense as processing and disposal are provided by the county. We also all have Marburg as a hauler with variations in collection services, which contributes to some of the difference in rates. Next slide. So we'll have more discussion of rates at our public hearing before you on June 23rd. Utility customers were notified by letter and email of the rate increases last week, and we have information on our website. As always, we'll work with the customers to right size their services as able to reduce their costs and educate them on bill payment plans as well. Next slide. One more, thank you. So in looking at ways to decrease city program expenditures, as I said, and this is the 4.3 portion of the budget, we're looking at the following adjustments that can be made readily to reach those 5% reduction goals. Actually, the third line, the delay of cost of service study to 2022 is an item that we've already removed from the budget. So we will see that cost savings automatically this year. I'm postponing that hopefully to next year. It's an important piece in looking at the new collection contracts with Marburg to review our rate structure and make sure that it still makes sense before we go into negotiations for new collection services. We'd also added a new position this year for a code enforcement officer full-time to be dedicated to the Clean SB program. That is vacant, so that is a position that we can continue to keep vacant if needed for cost savings. And then finally, our public container replacement project. This is an annual capital project where we go out and refurbish and replace the trash containers out on the sidewalks and at the parks and waterfront. So we could put this program on hold for a year and resume next fiscal year. So those are some of our ideas. Okay, next slide, please. One more. And so just to talk briefly about some of our fiscal year 21 P3 highlights. The first is this project with CEC, the Food Bank, and all of the cities within the county to embark on a study to determine existing infrastructure and its gaps, more importantly, to provide an effective food rescue network in the county. And we must have the system in place by 2022. Secondly, getting apartment residents to participate in recycling and composting is challenging. So we've set up a pilot in partnership with the Housing Authority to collect food scraps at 23 of their buildings. And we hope to have this as a model for other communities to emulate. And then finally, we wanted to design and promote an easily accessible portable for all of the Clean SB services for the community to be able to see what we're accomplishing, and also importantly for them to be able to easily register their concerns or areas that need attention. Next slide, please. And with that, this concludes my portion of the presentation, and I will hand it off to Ms. Parenteau if you'd like to wait for questions till the end, or I'm happy to take them now.
Let's ask for questions now. Council members, anything for Ms. Irely on this segment? Okay, thanks. We'll go to Ms. Parenteau. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today presenting not only in this new department, but actually this new division, the Energy and Climate Division, to you. I'm Alelia Parenteau. I'm the Energy and Climate Program Supervisor, and I'm going to be going through a similar presentation to Ms. Irely with our program highlights, our budget and impacts, and then some P3 highlights for next year. So next slide, please. This is the division organization. It's currently led by the Energy and Climate Program Supervisor, and it's divided into two funds, if you will. The Energy and Climate Program, which does the energy and management work around the city and the community and implements the strategic energy plan. And it's about a $2.3 million budget. In the very beginning of March, you did approve some new positions for that division, but they have not been filled, obviously, due to the pandemic. And then the other side is Santa Barbara Clean Energy, which is our community choice energy entity that will be kicking off in fiscal year 21 with a budget of $3.8 million for that first year, which will balloon into about a $30 million budget in the following fiscal year once we're really ramped up. Next slide, please. So this is a little graphic that shows what we do in the division. We administer Santa Barbara Clean Energy, and right now we're in that implementation phase of that organization. We design, implement, and maintain energy projects such as street lighting projects and interior lighting projects or HVAC remodels. We do the energy and climate programming, so we're doing a lot of community programming development through the strategic energy plan effort that we did last year. We manage the city's utilities, climate action planning, and resilience planning. Next slide, please. So you've heard me speak to you about community choice energy before, but really this just means we're going to begin procuring energy on the entire city's behalf. This will greatly improve our renewable energy content per council's goals, and will also provide us some local control over rates, revenues, and program investments. Again, we're planning to launch in 2021. Next slide, please. The oldest function of our program is municipal energy management. And so since 2008, our group has managed electrical and natural gas use in city facilities, and that includes the over 650 utility accounts that are allocated to the city. We process payments for all of the general fund accounts, and we audit rates to make sure we're paying the correct amount. And then we look for opportunities for savings. Next slide, please. So energy projects have been a big function of our group. We're constantly looking for opportunities. We've hit a lot of the low-hanging fruit. You'll notice most of our buildings have high efficient lighting, new HVAC systems and controls, etc. So now we're really shifting into the renewable space, solar system developments and battery storage opportunities. Next slide. And then a big focus that we have now, which is fairly new in the last few years, is energy reliability and resilience. We're working really closely with the utilities to make sure that our local energy systems are reliable and that they're resilient in terms of an outage. During the Thomas fire, we got very close to seeing what a citywide outage would look like. And so we're putting a lot of plans in place to ensure that our city can continue to operate and provide essential services during outages. Next slide, please. And lastly, we are coordinating with other city divisions and departments to update the city's climate action plan. This is a pivotal plan that really informs a lot of the city's sustainability strategy. And we want to make sure that the new plan not only is in line with modern sustainability standards, but also is implemented. And so we are taking on responsibility for implementing those strategies into the future. Next slide, please. And now for our financial overview. Next slide. So the projected revenues for fiscal year 21 are about $6 million, and that is largely Santa Barbara Clean Energy, and that'll be through utility rates. So when people pay their electricity bill, the generation portion of that bill will come to the city. There is one piece that still is an unknown and needs to be discussed further with the Finance Committee, and that is the startup loan for the Community Choice Energy entity. It had previously been discussed to come out of the Southern California Edison settlement, and that just needs to be finalized. Next slide, please. And then our projected expenditures, again, largely to do with power supply through Santa Barbara Clean Energy. About half of our $6.2 million in expenditures. And then a good number of it is utilities. The city spends about $4 million per year on electricity and about $150,000 a year on natural gas. Next slide, please. And then we do have a capital program. These are projects that we fund every year, and they're usually funded through our Energy Revolving Fund. Our Energy Revolving Fund was established 3 years ago. And what it does is it reinvests savings attributed to energy projects or rate reductions back into a designated fund that can be allocated to energy-specific capital projects. So these are a few that we'll be working on next year, including a high-voltage streetlight upgrade on Upper State Street, hopefully, and battery storage energy systems at several city facilities. And then we'll continue with our Zero Net Energy Roadmap project. We did this last year. It was a roadmap that looked at how to make our city facilities use as much energy as they produce and no more. And so we'll continue to implement some of those projects that are outlined in that guide. And so our COVID-related budgetary impacts. Next slide. We are somewhat fortunate that, sort of, if you can consider it that way, that actually Southern California Edison is requesting that we delay our CCE launch due to some administrative issues they have, not COVID related, due to their billing system implementation to October of 2021. And so if we were to do that, we would inherently save $620,000 due to some regulatory requirements that come at particular times of the year. So that is looking more and more likely that we will have to push to October 2021, and that's true of any CCE that's looking to launch next year. And so there's an inherent savings there. Additionally, we are proposing to hold those 3 positions that were created in March for 6 months. which would result in about a $220,000 savings. And that would then result in a delay of strategic energy plan implementation items. And so we would have a savings there. The total reduction is just over $1 million, which is equal to about 17% of the energy and climate program budget. Next slide. So there are a few implications to those reductions, and that will be some delay in delivery of service, certainly in terms of how many energy projects we can support and implement, and some of the strategies that were outlined for the FY21 budget in the Strategic Energy Plan. We might have to delay some of our climate action plan development, though we're hoping we can do a lot of that in-house and during this time, so hopefully not too much of a delay. And then specific to the Strategic Energy Plan, we're going to delay some of our outreach and community engagement. We are having a hard time engaging with the community since it's all virtual right now, and we'll delay the development of the Smart Energy Zone that was outlined there. Next slide. And then just to summarize, I'll take a look at our P3 highlights for FY21. We annually look to increase the city's renewable energy content in our power mix by 5%. And with the launch of Community Choice Energy, we will more than accomplish that. The city is currently at 42% renewable energy in our power mix, and we'll be at 100% once the Community Choice Energy organization launches. We also look to achieve $30,000 or more in annual energy savings through our projects, and every year we've surpassed that mark. So that's we're hopeful that we'll do that again. We'll be finalizing our municipal green building policy. We've already brought this to the Sustainability Committee. We've done a lot of work revamping our building policy that's specific to municipal buildings and making them as green as possible. And then we're embarking on work on an electric vehicle charging master plan so that we can have a really thoughtful rollout of where our electric vehicle charging stations are located throughout the city to help motivate people to drive electric vehicles. With that, I think we're on to questions.
I think Mr. Casey wanted to have some closing words. Ms. Parento, thanks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. There's just two key takeaways I would like to make sure we're really clear on. One is it's my opinion and recommendation that one of your top priorities has been community choice energy and that you want us to go forward with that effort. And so that's why my proposed budget to you includes that effort, and that's what Ms. Parento presented to you today. So I'm looking for confirmation of that, or I'm looking for enough of you to say, no, you don't want to do that. Otherwise, I think I'm meeting what has been one of your top priorities. It will include a $2 million loan of startup costs that will get paid back over a number of years by the climate change energy stuff. And then the savings that Ms. Parento went through are substantive and meaningful. They will fall more to the water and wastewater funds, which we're picking up a very large portion of these startup costs. So I don't want you to think that that is going to our general fund bottom line, but those funds are also struggling through this economic crisis. And so savings to them is also beneficial. So I just wanted to clarify that most of the savings she identified go to different enterprise funds, and just a small portion goes to the general fund of those savings.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go ahead and take questions for Ms. Parento, Ms. Irely, or Mr. Casey. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Casey, is this the moment you want confirmation on that, or are we saving that for after public comment?
Go for it.
Okay, I would love to go for it. This is one I really just wow. Even before COVID and the responsiveness in creating this department and division, and it is one of the most exciting things I believe that the city is doing right now, and it's just remarkable. Thank you to Rebecca Bjork for stepping up to fill the double positions. I know when we visioned this, we saw extra staffing for Ms. Parento and a chance to really launch a lot of things. So just as we're going into this, it seems like a lot of savings through keeping a lot of positions open, where other departments might be talking about one position left open or not. And once we get to the bigger picture, maybe looking at if all of those need to be kept open or not. But this is such an important thing, and over long term will create savings, I think, for the whole city. And I actually had a question in there, but I lost it just in my praise for what it is you've accomplished. And Mr. Casey, thank you for this responsiveness in creating this department and these divisions. And if you're looking for confirmation about community choice, I have complete confirmation in that. I think for all of the problems that our city is facing long term, this is really what we need to address it. And the resiliency and sustainability pieces are really what we need. So that's my voice of confirmation.
Thanks. Are there questions on this segment from anyone else? I am assuming we have people waiting to do public comment. And while Ms. Gorman is coming up and lining that up, I will add to Mr. Casey that you are being responsive to a lot of enthusiasm from the council to address climate change. And the pandemic has almost erased our memory about what was happening even 3 months ago, but that is a real threat to our environment and to our public health in a different way. Ms. Gorman, go ahead if there's people wanting to speak to us. Thank you.
Madam Mayor and Council, there is only one person who is on hold to speak to us. That's Sarah York Rubin. So if now's the time, I can go ahead and bring her up.
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. Ms. Rubin, thank you for holding on. You have 3 minutes. Please mute your TV. I'm going to unmute you. Let's see. And Ms. Rubin, you can go ahead.
Oh, yes, and I'd actually planned to take my hand down because I understand this has been such a long meeting, so I apologize for that. Did not mean to submit public comment still. I'm so grateful for Madam Mayor and members of council, all of your work, and the Office of Arts and Culture is here to help as your partner. That's all I will say. We are here. We're in this together. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. York Rubin. I think you'll find there's a lot of enthusiasm for our arts and culture, even in these tough times. So thank you for your short comment. I think I know where you're coming from. And Ms. Gorman, should I close public comment then? Anybody else raise their hand?
Madam Mayor and Council, correct. No further callers on the line.
Public comment is closed. We'll go to Mr. Casey. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. So I just want to kind of put some organization structure. So this is the time that I'd like to hear from council if we're not meeting the mark or if there's changes or questions or more information that you need. I'll tell you what I've already heard. I've already heard a detailed description of our finances and expenditures in Measure C, which will be coming on Monday. You would like a breakdown of the city administrator's office positions and salaries, and we will prepare that in the next couple of days and get that to you all. I heard one comment about wanting not to implement the cuts to the city clerk's office. I'll take that under advisement. If there's more of you who feel strongly about that as well, please let me know. It's a relatively small amount in the scheme of things, but we'll put that into consideration as we put the final package together. And I'm assuming that we do want to go forward with community choice energy. So I would just ask if you don't think that's the right direction to go ahead and chime in. And then if there's anything else that has come up today that you would like to share, this is the time to do so. And then we'll have other departments present as we go along, and then we'll try to consolidate it all with a recommendation to you in early June.
If it's okay, I'll ask my colleagues if anyone needs to leave early. It's 4 o'clock. I'm sorry if I didn't manage the hearing quickly enough. Maybe we've learned a lesson, Mr. Casey, to put one less item, in a 3-hour period. Some of you have children, some of you have outside jobs. Does anybody want to go first? Or otherwise we'll just go with Ms. Sneddon and whoever turns on their video. Okay, Ms. Sneddon, go ahead.
And I'm free to stay. So if anybody else needs to jump in, okay.
Ms.
Okay.
Harmon, are you in a rush? Okay. Mr. Freedman, wait in line. Okay, Ms. Sneddon, go ahead.
Well, at first I have a question, and I think this is for Mr. Casey. So when we deal with percentage decreases across departments and across budgets, some of these budgets are, over $2 million and some are $78,000. right? Like, am I reading that right? That sustainability is a total of $78,000, status quo budget. And so when we're doing percentages, and this is my thinking behind the city clerk's office too, that, you know, a 5% decrease in an already lean and mean department could decimate the department, whereas a 5% decrease in something that's, I don't want to say bloated, but is full-bodied and performing well and has a lot of services, a 5% decrease might not be so devastating. And is there a model, or is it something that we talk about, or could we talk about some sort of gradational sliding percentage where really small departments that really don't have a big budget anyway, maybe don't have to take quite as big of a hit? And that's my thinking with the city clerk's office. I mean, the idea of going back to paper seems sort of outrageous to me, and the savings that might bring out of I don't know, that doesn't seem as reasonable to me. And then the sustainability and resilience, I'm so excited to be starting this division department, and I think holding those positions is a good idea for now. But eventually, you know, that's 4 positions. That's a really big difference than, say, HR holding 1 open. And I don't know enough about the inner workings of each department to make that call. But just the overarching thing as we're going through this whole big picture, 5% across the board seems a little bit of a blunt tool. And if just you could speak to that. But other than that, just my feedback, the really great IT department, getting that Excella going. I mean, I don't want to lose track of these the performance that each department has done. I mean, just because we're in this budget crisis at the moment, the work done this past year has been incredible, and getting that Excella live for citizens is huge. Holding that was a good solution, holding positions open, I think. And then with HR, I'm sorry to delay the reclassification, but that also seems like something that can wait, especially when we don't have budget money to change those classifications. And just really congratulations on their accomplishments. And I guess I'll keep it brief. Those are my comments. And then just that question as we're going through this about whether 5% might give or take from other areas where it won't have such an impact as a smaller department.
Madam Mayor and Councilwoman Snett, I have a very fair question. I think it's a prudent way for us to kind of look at what the options are and present them to you. But for instance, like I just mentioned, the clerk's office, the total cuts of their 5% totals $30,000. And when we're trying to balance a $9.7 million deficit, that's an extremely minor amount. So happy to get that feedback that, you know, that's just not an area you want to go. Eventually, we got to put 9.7 million together, but $30,000 give or take is not going to keep me up at night in the scheme of things. So that's the kind of feedback. You know, I've reviewed the department budgets. I think they're kind of reasonable concessions to be giving. I think there's an equity among departments that's good for morale within the organization. All departments, I think, feel they're kind of running thin going into this. And so, you know, each of them would fight and die for an extra $50,000 to do something. So I think it's an okay approach to start with, but this is the kind of feedback that happy to get. And then on the community, the resiliency positions, the energy positions, again, those were more funded, not so much with the general fund, but with water and wastewater and other special funds. So if you want us to come back with a specific look at that in 6 months' time and evaluate whether we want to move forward with those positions at that point, we'd be happy to do so, because we know this is a priority for council and we were excited about getting started on it. So I think it's prudent to kind of hold off and let things settle a little bit, but that's something we can come back and look at.
Very good, thank you.
Councilmember Alejandra Gutierrez would like to go next. Still there? Ms. Gutierrez?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Alejandra Gutierrez just sent me a message a few minutes ago saying that unfortunately she had to leave for another meeting. So I believe she's
okay. I saw that message. I thought she might want to go next, but okay. Mr. Casey, so we'll get her comments. We'll ask her to be sure and email you. Okay, so everybody will have their say. Ms. Harmon, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I echo Mayor Pro Tem Sneddon's thanks and congratulations. She said it very well, better than I can. So I will just get to my comments. I also fully support the sustainability department having a place to house CCE. A home for it makes perfect sense. And it's such an important endeavor, and it's a big endeavor. So I think this really is both in line with the direction that we have given as a council and really important to the success and long-term health and viability of community choice energy more generally. So very much support that. From the city administrator and mayor and council office presentation, which feels like a lifetime ago. Just a couple of points on that, because I didn't turn my light on during that. I think it was Councilmember Freedman who brought up the question about festivals that have been, or parades that have been canceled. Totally understand that there's, to some degree, those organizations need funding to get through, but to the extent we can go to them and kind of look, you know, we're all in it together. So if Solstice, for example, which has already been canceled, doesn't need $68,000, they could get by with 30. I would really just encourage us to, and I know you will, to do that. It's kind of low hanging fruit. And I think all of those organizations definitely understand that this is an all hands on deck moment. So I'm sure they would be very amenable to having that conversation. And then with regard to the mayor and council's travel and professional development budget, my personal view is that that should all go back to the general fund. I don't remember if we said 5% or 100%. I think it should be 100%. I'll just put that out there as my own perspective. And then in terms of issues that I would like to understand a little bit more moving forward, with the two new department heads, I'm not talking about sustainability here. I just kind of want to understand that a little bit more, what decision we're making now with these versus what we would make at a point in time when there's funding. I guess I still don't quite understand, I guess what I'm saying yes to, and how that relates to the labor concessions that we are sort of saying are going to be necessary. And I just want to tease that out a little more. And I already made my comments about costing and unfunded liabilities. So if we could get a little more information about that and tease that out for me, that would be very, very helpful for me to understand as we move through this process.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councilwoman Harmon. So I've heard from a couple of yous on the outside entities, and that was something we've talked about internally. So we will take the next few weeks to reach out to the different festivals that we fund and such and see if there isn't a way that we can garner some money that I think what I'm hearing, and I would agree with, that could go into kind of a jumpstart reopening kind of special event fund, which we need. So let us do that. Let us reach out and see if we can't work with our partners to see if there's some money we can cull back for the greater community need for the crisis right now. Okay, so let me try to answer and reassure you on the questions about the department head positions. So we are not recommending any funding for the IT director position. So there's nothing in the budget for that. For us to move forward with that, we would have to come back to council and get you to appropriate the money. So that is totally in your control and would have to come back to you for discussion in public session about when and if to finance that. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, so I totally get that. I guess then, so I'm confused about why it's even being brought up now.
Good question. So why it's being brought up now is because I'm doing away with the Administrative Services Department, and information technology used to fall under that. So I need to create a replacement organization structure for that.
I see. Thank you. That's extremely helpful. Extremely helpful. I mean, it may be useful for us to see, we could do even slides like overlays here, what it was before, this is why we're doing it now. That's extremely helpful to me.
And we'll thank you. I will try to work on some visuals to kind of show that and bring that back to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Casey.
So what I would say before we go to Mr. Freedman is that I don't think Solstice is canceled. I think you said, just to clarify, it's turned virtual. No, so, someone said Solstice was canceled. It's virtual.
I did say that. I apologize.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Freedman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First, I just want to thank all our staff that presented today. I think that you've shown that we're being creative, have a lot of ingenuity going into these challenges, and that we are looking forward and making the most of what we got, and appreciate all the effort that's come in there. I'll try to be brief here in regards to community choice energy. This is a project that has been over a decade in the making, and we're almost there. And I think it is exciting. I'll echo Councilwoman Steddon's comments on it. And I know it's something I've been working on for many years, and it allows us to meet a lot of our energy and climate action goals going forward. So definitely supportive of that. And then I think you articulated well, Mr. Casey, on looking at some of the festivals, if there is a reduction in the amount because they are either canceled or they're going into another format where their cost wouldn't be as great, that we could reallocate some of that into a startup fund or funding that we could use to promote the arts as part of our downtown reopening. I would be very supportive of that. And then the question I have is in terms of, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this because it's out there, but in a general sense, in terms of executive salaries, where does that fall if there was a reduction in executive salaries in terms of, is that part of the labor negotiations, or is that where within the budget would it fall?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councilman Freedman. If you're talking executive management salaries, it would fall to whatever fund funds those salaries. So those would not all be general fund. For instance, we have executive salaries that are covered by the water fund, the wastewater fund, the airport fund, waterfront fund, any different funds. So whatever reductions we do at the executive level would fall proportionally to how they were funded back to those respective funds. I have said publicly and will continue to say that I will lead and do more than what we will ask of our bargaining units. And I know my executive management team is prepared to do that as well. But I think we need to kind of let it play itself out a little bit more as we approach the table and work with our labor units to try to get concessions, because quite honestly, the amount of money you save on the executive management salaries is really symbolic. It's not of a magnitude when public safety, quite honestly, police and fire is your largest two cost sectors in the general fund. It's over 50% of the general fund, and they're all labor. So that's the challenge in kind of doing that, but we're prepared.
Okay. That's what I wanted to clarify is within that, because I know those questions have been asked, but I think it's all part, even though it's not specifically labor negotiation, it's part of that whole process of determining it. So I just wanted to, for the public to understand that that is being considered as part of the overall strategy for labor negotiations. And then lastly, I think that was all I had. In terms of, I remember the last thing I had was, I do have concerns with the clerk's office of going to paper and those concerns which I already brought up. But in terms of saying no cuts to certain departments, I have a hard time doing with that now without looking at the comprehensive budget, because I think each department is going to have today and will demonstrate the essential services that they provide and the work of their staff that they provide. And I think that there might be somewhat of an advantage of going earlier on the budget because you get to present. And so I don't want to make a commitment, don't cut this department now when we're going to have just as compelling cases later on. So I want to treat every department fairly. So I'm not going to say don't cut a certain department down and look at everything comprehensively, but I will raise the issue of the clerks today that those costs could actually, if there were those cuts, that they could actually be more or cost more because of the paper. So I want to see what that data is on that issue in particular that I talked about before. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Freeman, did you say you support CCE going forward? Oh yeah, you did. Okay.
Yes,
that's the first thing you said. Okay.
So.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Jordan, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So one thing Mr. Freedman said was, I think, same thing too. This is the first one of these I've gone through, and I'm kind of the same opinion that you get to see the first people first, and you have a different impression than when you get down to the end almost a month later and you're trying to figure out what to do with people and you don't want to be last. Mr. Casey, so I really just kind of have a question of you. It says, so what we're really seeing here are budgets and then suggestions for how they would meet the 5%. And when you start, in your mind, start horse trading with revenue generators versus service level cuts versus uses of reserves versus labor concessions, all that horse trading is really in a month, right? It's not right now, right?
Correct. That is, we're going to show you what the service reductions are looking at for the departments. I will then use my best professional judgment to prepare you, as the charter requires, an amended balanced budget, and then you get to modify that as you see fit, as appropriate as the policymakers. But right, it's a balance between all those different sources and trying to find the right one. And one of the challenges is labor unions. It takes time to meet and confer with them and discuss concessions and how you go about doing that. So it's just, you got to incrementally start plugging at that, but we need to get there by mid-June.
And so if we're thinking we can do 2.5%, or if we're thinking we can do 5%, but we accomplish neither of those, or we only accomplish one when we thought we were going to accomplish the higher, that's just a budget revision process coming in months from now, right?
Not sure I understand your question.
So you laid out multiple columns in one of those slides that showed 2 different shortfall scenarios. And one was, they were essentially the same except for labor concessions, right? And so the labor concessions could take months and months and months, right?
I hope not.
Okay,
They could, but we've already engaged the labor unions. They get it. They see what's going on. And so I hope it's not that long. And right, it could be that we're going to put a target number in there and then try to get those concessions in working with the labor unions and hope that we do. And if not, then we have to come back and make further cuts or make some other adjustment.
That just becomes another revision, like the revenues aren't tracking or expenses blew up or whatever, right? Okay. All right, thanks. Madam Mayor, so you're asking about CCE. I'm totally in support of that. I have no idea why I would ever use the $2,500 for travel. So I'm happy to give that back willingly without worrying about that also. And just like to thank everybody for the work so far. It's a ton of work under very stressful situation, which it's just normally a ton of work, and then you compound it with a very stressful situation. So I'm very appreciative of what everybody and we are going to be going through for the next 3 or 4 weeks. Thanks.
Very nice. Mr. Gutierrez, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Casey, a few months ago, I got an update on a resident city services reporting app. Is that project still under consideration, or what's the status of that?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez. We call that the Constituent Relation Management System, and that is still being recommended to be funded. And so I don't know if my IT folks are still on the line. They could maybe pop in and give us a quick status report if Marianne or Matt are out there. If not, we will get you a status report about what we're doing. There we go. I'll let one of them give you a status on that, but we're trying to preserve that. We think that's a good system that we want to implement. And so that did not show up on this round of reductions.
Ms. Knight. Take your time, that's fine.
And Ms. Knight, okay, you're good.
Sorry about that. My audio gave out partway through this. Yes, so thank you, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez. The project to implement a constituent response management system, it is temporarily on hold. We have
sorry. Could any of you hear me through any of that? Okay, I apologize.
We heard you.
Okay, good. So that project, the project is underway. We have made quite a bit of progress on it. We had actually in March come to council to get approval to work with a project management firm to assist us in selecting a new product. Just looking at the different proposals we received 17 proposals in total. But we have temporarily put it on hold because we're in a really good place to do that right now with the project. We do want to move forward with it. As Mr. Casey has mentioned, it's still in progress, but we're just kind of not moving forward at the moment to until we see where things go with the budget.
Do you have any idea of how much it'll cost us to move forward with it? Or would you recommend just pausing it until we get through this issue?
I think it's a good idea to pause it through the rest of this fiscal year at the very least and see how things go. You know, as I mentioned, we got 17 different proposals. My staff was actually feeling pretty confident that we could find a product within our budget, and that there were some products that are very specific for the government market that are on the lower end of the costs. We just need to really fully vet them and see if they would meet our needs. So the next step for us really are to do things like demonstrations with the vendors. Typically, we coordinate those with, you know, in large gatherings where everybody can join in and participate. We could still probably do those as webinars or just using GoToMeeting. So again, we've just temporarily put it on hold. The team that is working on that project is our web services team, and they have been dedicated to improving our current processes so that we can meet the needs of the things that we now do in person. So to replace all of our in-person processes, that's their main focus right now. So I'd rather keep them at the moment focused on that before we look at implementing new services that we don't currently offer.
And Madam Mayor and Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, that is kind of the challenge on this one is if our budget projections kind of come out and we kind of stay on course and the recovery slowly comes and happens, then we think that, yes, let's go for this new thing. If things turn substantially worse, it will raise the question of, do you want to expend money on this new expenditure when we're really having to go to that next level of reduction? So I think that's why you hear Ms. Knight saying, you know, let's take a couple months, kind of see how things start playing out. We can maybe start doing the testing and doing the visit with the vendors and that sort of stuff. But we'll need to evaluate before we spend the money to make sure that we're ready to do so in a climate to do so.
Okay. When it comes to trying to be more mindful of or trying to keep from spending money on meetings and such, does that also mean things like retreats and food that is purchased during long meetings that we have during closed session?
Yes, I think it could. You know, again, I think the food we purchase for you all during long meetings is chips and cookies and crackers. It's nothing terribly extravagant, but more expensive kind of food stuff is one of those things you have to look at. It's just as a luxury to have and not a necessity to have.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that we should not spend that money on that for the time being. Did anyone bring up whether certain advisory groups potentially might be put on hold because of the amount of staff time that's put into them?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Gutierrez, Oscar Gutierrez, that's a good question. And you'll see that as the different departments kind of come forward. At this point, none of the departments are recommending eliminating any advisory groups. I think we're sensitive to recommending that as staff because it is such an important public process and volunteer process that's really that council kind of established. So we can look at that with your guidance and direction, but for this round, I don't believe we're recommending any elimination of any advisory groups.
I didn't say eliminate, just pausing them for.
Thank you.
A year.
Yeah, I don't see any of those coming forward. yeah, we can look at that as the department's going to go through and talk about the advisory groups that they support.
And did you also go over the repositioning of certain city staff in different departments and such?
Not sure. You know, I imagine you're talking about the position just recently in my office that seems to be creating quite a stir, where I reassigned Anthony Wagner from the police department PIO over to help with our citywide communications on COVID. And so he started on Monday. It's an existing position. We just lateraled him over from police department to city admin. I'm not aware of any other positions that we've been moving around, so I'm just assuming that that's what you're asking about.
Yes, and is there any type of salary increase or decrease associated with that?
No, I've heard that rumor as well, that he got a huge raise, and you know, lots of my staff would like a huge raise for the work they're putting in right now. No, it literally was just, I'm going to grab this position and bring him over to help because we're really up against it in my office and everyone's working extremely hard and we need more resources. And I appreciate Chief Luno offering him up, and I appreciate Mr. Wagner being flexible to come in and help. It's what you do in a time of crisis. You put your essential service hat on and you go where you're needed. So that's essentially what that move was.
You said that you're going to provide us with a list of positions and job descriptions. Is that right?
Yeah, you asked for in the city administrator's office. It's in the budget, but we will provide that to you. Absolutely.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have for right now.
Well, Mr. Gutierrez, my question to you is, do you support community choice energy going forward? That was one of the things that we wanted to hear from our council members.
Yeah, I believe it's pretty vital now, and it's going to be more vital in the future moving forward with the way things are going.
All right, thank you. Thanks. Okay, have we gone through everyone? Maybe it's my turn. So yes, I'm supportive of community choice energy going forward. I did want to say on that note that we have a climate change action plan. In some of the materials, it looked like we were drafting a new one, but I guess we're drafting an update of the one that we have. So in case the public thought we didn't have one. I think that was all I had. I'm going to reserve making broad statements at this point because I really want to see all of the departments and keep notes. And this is a strange and extraordinary time. When I got on the council in 2012, we were coming out of the recession and we actually had surpluses, which was a completely different thing. So it's going to be incumbent on all of us to be our best selves and very careful about how we go forward, saving money. And it's a good exercise for us and to take care of our community and our services and our employees. This is very difficult for our employees to think that they might have to take pay cuts. And so I just want to be sensitive when we talk about even executive employees taking pay cuts. These are human beings we're talking about, and we should be very sensitive to them, their families, and their well-being. I'd like to say that I'm proud of our IT program department rising to the occasion during the pandemic. Human resources, solid, good work always from that department. All the employees in city administrator's office, our mayor and council office, Holly Perea does a great job there. And really excited about the sustainability and resilience department possibility going forward. I'd like to let everyone know that our next budget hearing is Monday, May 18th, 2 p.m. That's the next one, right, Mr. Casey? On Monday, it's airport, waterfront, and we've added the capital improvement program to that. And if there's not anything else, I wanted to close by thanking the California Air National Guard out of Fresno. They sent F-15C Eagle fighter jets across California to honor our healthcare workers and first responders. and essential personnel who have been working so hard during the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you to that. For those of you who saw it, it was really something. Mr. Casey, anything else before we close this budget hearing?
No, Madam Mayor, I appreciate the questions and the feedback. That is very helpful. I appreciate the recognition of staff having to redo the budget process under very short order, under very trying circumstances with so much going on elsewhere. It is hard on the organization. So I appreciate your patience and understanding that we're working very hard and doing our best, and we may not be 100% perfect all the time, but we're going to get there. We're going to get through it. Appreciate your feedback, and we'll keep plugging away. Monday, airport and waterfront, just to get your head in the game, those are enterprise funds, and so those are not part of the general fund balancing to that $9.7 million number. They will be presenting budgets to balance to their own needs based upon their revenue and expenditures that are meeting. So they'll present those. So those will just be a little bit different kind of standalone business entities that you'll be evaluating their budget. So you'll hear those presentations on Monday. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. Thank you to the staff that helped us today put this budget hearing on. This meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council is adjourned.